Okay, are we ready? I think so. Oh, no, that's not it. We want... There we go. Oh. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Markowsky. Welcome to my studio. Today we are going to look at your work. It took me a second there because we're doing something different than what we normally do. Although we have done this. This is the 20th time we've done one of these feedback episodes. So it's not the first time we've done it, but it just feels a little bit different. We are going to take a look at all the great artwork that you have been working on over the past few months. And I'm really excited because we're going to look at some of the work that we did when we rebooted the intro to the Master Study series. So we're going to look at some of our most basic paintings again, and offer some feedback to those people who are just sort of at the beginning of their painting journey, as well as some more advanced paintings, and of course the paintings that you're working on outside of class. So we've got a lot of stuff to look at here, which is always really exciting. It makes me really happy to have all of this material that you guys have created here. So let's just want to quickly remind everyone to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Probably if you're watching right now, you're already subscribed to the channel, but there's certainly people that tune in just randomly, and if you want to participate in this, it's free. And here's some free ways to support the channel, right? However, if you do want to leave a donation, there's a link to the PayPal link below. There is YouTube Super Chat function. You can do an e-transfer. All those other options are also, of course, available to you as well. And maybe I just want to mention that all of the artwork that we're going to look at was posted to our community's private Facebook page, which I encourage you to join as well, because not only do I post links to all the upcoming videos, but there's a great community of people who are actively trying to get better and better, either by following the classes that I'm teaching, and in addition to the feedback from other students, because there's some people that have been painting for decades and who are just, taking these classes as a way to get a little bit better, as a refresher, and they're in many cases able to offer some advice that maybe I'm not able to get to, or there's a lot of activity in here. Anyway, so let's move to our kind of, I think, first thing here. What I want to do is I want to talk about maybe just a few things that people have posted that I just found really inspiring, and then we're going to look at the art that you've created based on other people's artworks, right? The ones that we've done in class, and then we'll look at other things that you're doing outside of class. Now, so we'll start right here. This is a painting that Charmaine did, and uploaded it to the Facebook group, and I just thought this was kind of interesting here. So, as Charmaine says, I painted this father who passed away 3 months ago at age 70, and I'm going to give it to his daughter as a gift. He was an American, immigrated from Nigeria 40 years ago. He was proud of his cultural heritage. So I chose the colors of the Nigerian flag as his clothes and background. I used 2 small photos of him as reference. Tried hard to show light on his face. Painting black skin is challenging. I feel I gained a little confidence and want to do more. I hope his daughter likes it. So, I loved this. I loved the concept behind this painting. I think it's super generous to make a painting of your family members or your friends, but even more so making a painting of someone else's family or friends. Right? Just think about how we have lots of friends and family, and some of them might be getting older or not feeling well. Can you imagine what a gift it would be to give a good friend of yours a painting of their partner or their parent or their child, maybe if they're in the hospital. I think that would just sort of blow their mind. So if you're looking for content, just go through your Facebook friends and take a profile photograph and make a painting based on them. So again, the idea of doing this, especially, I thought this was just a wonderful way to kind of just begin, because the gesture is so beautiful, and also, you know, the way that you've done it and your use of the colors, I think, is just really spectacular, right? To kind of help reinforce the personality of the individual depicted in the painting. So I'm trying to remember to sort of, I mean, I don't know what advice I could offer here. I mean, I think you've done a really good job. Like, you've got his skin tone here really nicely. These highlights are pretty good. Painting mouths and teeth are really difficult. And often when I'm doing paintings and drawings of people, I usually opt for images where their mouths are closed, just because it's one less thing to do. So you'll also, just if you look through art history, a lot of people's mouths are closed in paintings. Now, there's also one of the reasons why that happens is because historically dental care was few and far between, and a lot of people had like wooden teeth or no teeth, or so often people didn't smile because they didn't want people to see their actual teeth. But that's not the case here, I don't think. So maybe just doing a little bit less bright white teeth. Even if someone has big bright white teeth, that it sometimes can be, if you paint it, look a little bit strange, right? Sometimes we have to paint things wrong in order to make them look right, if that makes any sense. Yeah, the other thing too, maybe just the beard. Some of these, the white is just a little bit intense, and I think we could have gone for just a little bit. Well, I would say this maybe should be darker, like his hair. Even again, maybe there's light shining on his hair here. But other than that, you may also want to have a pupil in his eyes, because we have like they're kind of a little bit kind of glazed over. I know these are highlights, but it might be just nice to have a little pupil in there. Otherwise, the chain that he's wearing, really nicely done. Great job, Charme. So that's fantastic. Love it. I also want to, you know what, maybe I'll circle back to a few of these later. Okay, so we'll come back to that, because I want to, there was a few things and I'm like, oh, they're really cool, but you know what, I'm just, in the interests of keeping you wondering, we'll come back to the very, very end. So I think the first thing where we left off last week is the last artist that we talked about was Sonia Delaunay, the great Ukrainian artist, probably my favorite Ukrainian artist. And the next artist that we did as part of our Master Studies series was Henri Matisse, or Henry Matisse, I guess you could say. Henri Matisse, the great French painter. We did a whole week dedicated to his work. So let's just start looking at these. Okay, and just give me 1 second here. Okay, so here what we're looking at is one of Matisse's cutouts that he did. And if you remember, when I did this particular episode, we did a hand-painted version, and I also did a cutout version of it. And both of which were interesting learning experiences, even though I've done, obviously, both of them many times. Just every time I step into someone else's shoes, it takes a second to kind of, you know, understand the process. So here's Donna's version. I think that's awesome, Donna. Really nicely done. Very clean, nice clean edges here. It is, you know, we've got a beautiful background too. I'm really impressed. I wonder if you used You must have used some kind of tape, and then maybe it didn't turn out so well after you peeled the tape off and then painted into it, perhaps. Just because we can see that the background's got these really nice, consistent, like brush strokes that go right through. So I wonder what happened there. But either way, I think it certainly turned out really well. And if you wanted to do this again in the future, I think learning a little bit about these techniques would make it easier. Just like doing anything the second, third, fourth time gets a lot easier. And that's one of the things I think about, you know, with these series. You know, we sometimes only spend one episode with one artist, and so we're picking up or trying a technique once, and then sometimes we leave it behind, and it's hard to really master that technique. That's why I always try to find different artists who are attacking the same problem from different angles, so that we do try to build a little bit more on them. But that was, you know, by the end of the week of Matisse, I felt like I had really come to an understanding of his work, which felt really good for me personally. Here's Paula's version, and did a very different version here. This kind of a black shape on here. I wonder what was your thinking behind that, Paula. That is very interesting, because obviously totally different color scheme. You know, it reminds me of like I feel like this would look great as like a pendant, right? Like as like what kind of like soapstone or something, and that carved in. That could be a really cool little thing. Or even as a, we have upstairs in our living room, my wife, long before we met, has something kind of similar on like a little plaque. So I could see that also. The shape of it, I think I'd probably wish it was a little bit more oval shaped. So maybe kind of rounding it out. But anyway, just sort of spitballing here. Let's move on to another one. Okay, and looks like both Donna and Paula also did these two as well. So here's Donna's version of the leaf, and then here's Paula's version of the leaf. Again, as I think I prefer this one, Paula, over this one. There's something I like in here, the asymmetry of this shape seems to make more sense, or the fact that you outlined it makes it look more deliberate. I think maybe if we had an outline also around here, maybe a well, you've got some sort of red or pink, orange or something under there that might work well as an outline to kind of just give it shape. Same sort of, because I think that really gives us an idea that everything that we see here was done deliberately. And I have mentioned before, like if things are a little bit askew, make it more askew so that people know that it's askew deliberately, even if you didn't do it deliberately, right? You can just make it a little bit more. Same sort of thing, like if a painting is a little bit crooked, it just sort of drives me a little bit crazy. But, you know, if the painting was super crooked, you'd have to be like, huh, I guess it's supposed to be like that. That's strange. Or, you know, it's like musicians. You know, if they flub a note, as the saying goes, just play it again, flubbed, and everyone just thinks, I thought he made a mistake, but it looks like that was totally intentional. Very interesting. Wow, super advanced improvisation. Anyway, this also just kind of reminds me of like the Jurassic Park logo or something, like those colors, or like it looks like a footprint or something now. Okay, let's keep on going here. Okay, so a lot of people did this next one. So this is the painting of Henri Matisse's daughter, Marguerite, and this is one I really enjoyed. It's one of my favorite paintings of all time. I think this is in the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., if I recall. And I'm trying to remember this episode. I think this might have been at one point in the collection of Pablo Picasso. I think they did a swap. I'll have to watch the video that we did to remember what I said and the research I did on it. But anyway, I think this was a great painting for us to do, especially if you're sort of at the beginning of your journey, because we can do some more complex things like the way that we did, let's say, the background. But it's quite forgiving. The image is relatively straightforward and simple, right? So there's Kathy's. I really don't know what we can say on top of here, Kathy. I think you did. Actually, let's look through all of them first, and then we'll go through them a second time. Wow, there's so many. Okay. Let's climb back up here. Trying to get everything nicely sized on there. Okay. So, yeah, let's start here again with Kathy's. And yeah, I think this turned out really nice, Kathy. Maybe the glaze on the cheeks is a little bit not as subtle as it could be. I mean, but that's pretty minimal, and I think it's not that big of a deal. But and I can't quite remember how Matisse did it. But, just maybe softening those edges out just a little bit with a blending brush would help. But it's also, it doesn't bother me too much, but I'm looking for things to offer advice on. It looks like this got a little bit blurred when you must have painted over it or smudged it. So I wonder, I don't think those are Posca pens. It looks like a paintbrush, so I'm not quite sure how that would have happened. Either way, I really like the little bit of variations in the background. I think that turned out great. Good job, Kathy. Let's move on here to Heidi. So this is the beginning of the painting, I think, right? And here's the finished version. It does look like it might have had a little bit of difficulty here on the chin. I wonder what happened there. Looks like, is that the paper kind of falling apart? It's hard to tell. Is that texture from paint that's dried, or from the paper maybe getting scrubbed and it's starting to pill a little bit like an old sweater or something? I mean, I think it does look a little bit like almost stubble or something, right? Because it's got a little 5 o'clock shadow or something. So I think even if we had a little bit of this skin tone come back over top of here, which would be really tricky, because unless you've got a tube of this, you'd have to mix it again. So to quote-unquote fix this painting, you would probably want to kind of paint around a lot of this. Even I would just paint right over top of her cheeks and just clean. You could even paint literally right over top of the whole face. And with this skin tone, some of the lines are going to be very, very subtle, especially if you don't add any glazing fluid or matte medium, so it's fully opaque. Of course, also paint her neck and chest there and ear if you do something like that. But then you would have the option, everything would look a little bit sharper and cleaner, and I think that might alleviate some frustration that you might feel here. But everything else looks really well. Like the hair is fantastic. And Heidi, I know, has been painting with us for a long time, so is certainly capable of doing really, really great things. So it's I'm curious to see how that happened there. Let's look at, Kathy says she really likes this one, and it sits in my kitchen. Awesome. That's great to hear. I love when your art lives with you and it's not just sitting on a shelf somewhere in a basement. I think it's really important to take your work, put it up somewhere where you can see it. Especially, well, there's different artists have different viewpoints on this. Some artists really like to be able to walk away from a new artwork. Picasso would turn new paintings against the wall so that we just see the backside of them. And he would do that, at least he did that earlier in his career. I'm not sure about towards the end, but he would just do that, let them sit there for a few weeks while they dried, and then that way he's not looking at them constantly. He would just sort of, okay, turn them there, let's just sit, and then we'll come back to it a few weeks later. And then sometimes he'd be like, wow, that's way better than I remember it. That's amazing. I thought this was garbage. Or he might be like, I'm so excited to look at these. These are going to be so great. I was so happy. And then, that's very different than I remembered how they, And so that can happen for sure. And it can happen to a great artist like Picasso. So that's one attitude or approach to dealing with your quote-unquote finished paintings. Another one is to just, as soon as you're done, just put it up, sit back, and just and look at it, or put it somewhere in your living room, on your mantle, in your kitchen, like Kathy, and then you kind of absorb it. Especially if there's a painting you feel happy about, that it's successful. I think it's really important to start surrounding yourself with those successful artworks, so it encourages you to do more. And also, sometimes if things don't turn out at this, hey, this happens to me. There's been several times after these episodes where I just sort of like, ugh, what am I doing? I'm a fraud. I can't believe this. And then I go upstairs and I look at some of the other ones and I think, oh, look, I've done lots of good stuff. Well, it's just a blip, you know. We can't be perfect all the time, right? Anyway, rant over. Here's Maria's version here. That looks great. It's interesting. Her face looks a little bit different. She has a little bit of an older face here. Like, so for instance, if we just look back at Kathy's, because this chin is a little bit more rounded and the cheeks a little bit fuller, it makes her look quite young. I'm not sure how old she was when this painting was painted, but I think she was around 7 or 8. She does look a little bit older than that in the original painting itself. With Maria's here, she's starting to, because the jaw's a little bit more square and her cheeks are a little bit tighter, they don't quite have that baby fat, she looks a little bit older. So here she sort of looks like the mother or the teacher of this younger girl, right? Does that make sense? Like, you can see how even this line here appears to kind of cut inward, right? Like that, just that little bit. So it's not a big deal, and I think the painting's fine. I just want to sort of share with you the things that I noticed that maybe some other people, beginner painters, may not notice or understand. Because sometimes, you know, I think a big part, we talk about this at art school all the time, is that the whole point of art school is for you to I mean, obviously learn how to use these different tools, but to participate in critiques so that you understand the critical method, so that later on, when you're all by yourself in your studio, you can evaluate your own work on your own without the assistance of a teacher or someone else's eye looking at it, right? And that is really, really, really important, because that's one of the things that I missed as soon as I finished art school, is that like constant feedback from teachers and fellow students. It sort of evaporates, and then you're just like, I got a new painting. Does anybody want to talk about it and tell me how to make it better? You've got to learn how to do that. Okay, so here's Pascal's got, I guess this is the version in progress and the finished version. That looks pretty cool. I like the texture that you added in here. That is a really kind of neat little innovation. It's also very brushy, like a lot of texture just in the way that you're applying paint. And it's interesting, Pascal, I've seen you kind of move from some more precise approaches to painting to a little bit more looser, a little bit more expression in the way that you're painting. And this one is definitely looks like a painting that maybe you enjoyed, like you're just because there's a sense of speed. The way that, for instance, in the background, these brush strokes feel like they're being applied quite quickly, which is, there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's just interesting just to think of how different approaches to painting will influence the way that we think about the painting or the message that the artist is trying to convey, right? So, and you know, I have students that go 4 years through art school, and I'm constantly asking, like, what is it you want to say? Like, ultimately, you know, through your artwork, you know, even if you say, oh, I just really like flowers and I just want to paint flowers. Well, how do we convey that love of flowers? Is it just painting flowers? Is that really just tell us that you just really love flowers? Or can we do something to really emphasize that? Maria says, thank you, Michael. I understand and I'm grateful. I wish you'd be tougher. You want me to be tougher on you? I think you did a great job here. I think that's really the only thing I would say, is that just her face just looks a little bit more, just a little bit older, right? So I think you did a great job. Pascal, I think, again, you did a great job here too. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Let's move on here to Paula. And Paula did, again, wow, that's cool. So it's interesting. I'm trying to remember. I think we painted the hair green and then we darkened over top of it, because that's what it appears that Matisse did himself. But I think it looks like Paula just kept the hair green. Now, I will say this does start to make me think of like the Joker from Batman, because we have this bright green hair, which, yeah, the Joker's got green hair, and then kind of bright lips, and kind of a little bit more of just a pale skin tone, because this skin is quite light, and I don't mind those associations to, you know, a cartoon character, comic book character, but I do. It is a pretty powerful association, right? So, which, you know, sometimes we're not aware of. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've done an artwork, especially when I was in school, just like I was talking, and you bring it to class and you're really excited and everyone looks at it and they're like, oh, didn't you read the newspaper last week? Like, there's this thing you did here is like, you know, it's all over the, like, because I used to do a bunch of things that used things in the news, and you might not realize it until it gets out in the world. And I can think of a few examples, very high-profile examples of artists making art and it being exhibited, and there being like major protests about it, and you sort of wish that someone had been around just to say, like, I don't know if you want to, that's not the right time for that painting right now. Just, and so it's better to have that happen in a classroom setting than it is on the world stage. So, wow, okay, Rachel. I posted this here not because she's stellar, but in support of Michael's warning about using Sharpies. The board I had... The board I reused had Sharpie all over it, and despite many layers of the paint, it still came through. Ah, okay, so she's saying that maybe it looks like some of this design was on a previous painting, and it kept coming through. That's actually, I'm glad you mentioned that. That's another reason not to use Sharpies in your paintings. I also learned this the hard way. I remember when I was in art school, I had a friend who did a project where she wrote some text on the wall and left some materials there for people to kind of interact with it and to paint and draw directly onto the wall. And I had some Sharpies. I think I was just walking by with a Sharpie, so I did a bunch of drawing all over the wall. And then she tried, after the exhibition was over, to repaint it, and just like you're saying, that Sharpie just kept bleeding through, like 5, 6, 7 coats of paint. It just would not go away until we had to use like some anti-graffiti paint, or it's called Kilz, K-I-L-Z, to paint over it to block out that, because it just would not go away. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Rachel. Yeah, I think this looks great. Again, she does look a little bit older. Her face just is a little bit less round. So, and also maybe it's the way that like, so for instance, I did that whole drawing series, which you can, it's on YouTube, it's totally free. And one of the things I did an episode talking about drawing children, adults, and seniors, and sort of the way that people's bodies and faces change as we grow older. And, you know, if you, particularly like children, they tend to have like really big eyes, really big ears, much maybe smaller mouths, and then kind of their face, you know, is kind of pudgy, and then sort of everything seems to kind of grow kind of around those things. So in the original Matisse, she's got gigantic eyes, and that really emphasizes her youth. And so even just making them a little bit smaller is going to just kind of age your person here a little bit. Heidi says this was done on mixed media paper. Huh. I'm curious as to what happened there. It's interesting. Okay, let's keep on going here. I think some of the feedback I'm giving probably applies to a lot of the paintings that we see going forward, as well as, you know, even if you didn't post yours to the Facebook group, I'm sure there's a few people like, yeah, that's interesting. What he's saying, that's exactly, that's what happened with mine. Yeah, that's totally true. That's great. Now I know some ways to kind of fix it, right? Similar kind of thing here, you know, this little bit smaller eyes and narrower kind of face makes her look a little bit older. It's funny, like all of these just remind me of teachers that I had when I was in elementary school, because I went to a French school when I was a kid, and most of my teachers were literally from France, not from Quebec, but literally from France. So they just sort of really remind me of these these teachers that I had, because she looks kind of, I feel like this, I saw this look a lot. not really impressed with me. Wow. Okay, Roxana here. So this gives us, like, look at how much bigger those eyes are. Now she does still feel not quite as old. Not so much younger though. I'm trying to think. Let's look. So we do have those real big eyes. It does make her look a little bit younger, but it does look a little bit cartoony. Now, the original is kind of cartoony as well. But one of the things, and we've talked about like how if you open, like it's really, really hard to open your eyes completely so that we see white all the way around. Like, I really, even just to get, you know, the tops of my irises touching, and just the top of them touching my eyelids, I have to like really strain, right? So it looks a little bit unusual if we were to do this with a realistic painting, and then it sort of crosses over into cartoony if they're too wide open. But I do like, so here for instance we have the kind of the blush on the cheeks, and it's pretty strong, but I don't mind it in this particular instance here. It also looks like we've got some hairs that fell off the brush, so some, which is not uncommon, right? Some of those brushes, especially if we have a little bit few less expensive ones, tend to kind of shed hairs a little bit. Oh, that's interesting. That's a really beautiful one, Susan. That turned out great. So, this one seems like the most maybe refined, I would say, of all the ones we're looking at. I think it might be partly to do with this little bit of white that is mixed into our background color. So that's just sort of giving a little bit of opacity and softness to the background. Also, the way that you've painted this in here, like definitely it looks like the black lines are the very last thing, and they're done kind of quite carefully. It just, there's a lot of precision in here, even though it looks like it's done quite quickly, which is also a very Matisse thing. Matisse is sort of notorious for making paintings that look like they were done really quickly, even though he labored over them for hours and hours or weeks. He wanted that look that it was just created instantly, because that makes him look like a genius, right? When he had to really work for some of those. I can't think of anything else to say here. I think these are great. But this one, I think there's a sharpness to this that I think is really, really special, Susan. Okay, so let's, I'm just staring at them like, oh wow, these are great. Let's look at this Matisse here, Icarus, from the book Jazz that Matisse created, probably the most famous artist book of all time. I'm surprised only one person, is it possible only one person did this painting? I like that, Paula, you used a little bit of the collage that we did as well. It looks like you did these kind of stars kind of quickly and then cut them out, which is not a bad thing, but one of the things that Matisse did is we don't see the pencil lines or the pen lines. He just sort of started cutting directly those shapes out. So, you know, one thing you could do is just literally, you could draw those lines with a pen, cut it out, and then flip them upside down so that the pen or pencil is where the glue is going to go, and that sticks down, and then you'll have a little bit of a cleaner type of image here without these lines. Again, not a big deal, and I am happy that you experimented with it, because I can see underneath, looks like you tried painting the entire thing and thought, hey, well, let's do a little bit of collage. So good on you for experimenting with that one. That is awesome. I see Paula says, sorry, Michael, this student never follows the rules. Hey, rules are made to be broken, and once you understand and you feel like you kind of have kind of mastered a little bit of the so-called right way to do things, then by all means start taking some risks, trying some different things. I'm the last one to discourage people from taking a creative approach to a project or idea. So let's look at these. This is one of my favorite paintings of all time. They're all favorite paintings of mine, but the green stripe here, this painting that Matisse did of his wife, is, I think, just a fantastic painting. So here we've got Heidi's, Laurie's, Maria's, Paula's. Here's two Paulas. There's the other one. There's Susan's. Wow. And Tanya's. Wow. Okay. So, how about let's start. Excuse me. Maybe let's start right here. Now, I just have this one from the side. So, I'll do my best to try to. I think this turned out great. The one thing I'm trying to see is, it appears like this jaw is a little bit more square than this one. Just looking back and forth. But it could be the angle I'm looking at. And it's not that women don't have a square jaws, or, you know, that, but if the emphasizing of those things, you sort of want to de-emphasize on a female face and more maybe emphasize it or over-emphasize it on a male face, just to kind of, because I think often I hear from students that they're frustrated because, oh, it looks like my painting of a woman looks like a man, or vice versa, right? And people get often really upset about that. Personally, it doesn't bother me too much, but I know that that's something a lot of people think about or worry about. Otherwise, the way that you've painted this is fantastic, Tanya. I think it's really, really nice. Like the way that we've got this sort of blending of paint is, I think, exactly what I was talking about in that episode, really allowing the paint to kind of blend and smudge. Really cool. Great job. Here's Susan's. Interesting. Another one. It's in, you know, just thinking about the previous painting you did here, the way that you're painting, I really start to, you know, I think I've said this before with Susan particularly, like I start to feel a style of yours coming through here, which is really kind of nice. Like there's just the way that you're using the brush. There's a sensitivity that is really nice. Yeah, I think the colors might be slightly off, just the way it's photographed. It might be just a little bit bluer than it normally is, but I think it turned out really cool. Yeah, what else can I say? I mean, maybe the hair could be a little bit darker. I don't think it's quite that blue, but here's Paula's version here. You know, Paula, what I would say is maybe this green line, I think it has to be actually more pronounced here, because the painting is literally called Green Stripe. Well, I think it's called Green Stripe. That might be something that curators named afterwards, but it does feature quite prominently, and it does look a little bit like it's just sort of smudged here. So again, if we make it look really deliberate, then that tells people, wow, this is an intentional thing. We have to look at it not as a mistake, but as an intentional gesture. And then what does that mean, right? So it also looks like it's kind of small. Like this is, I guess, yes, because this is. Yeah, so it looks like this is almost like a quarter. Oh no, you did two. You did it again. Interesting. So okay, so here's the other version. Interesting. So there's that one and that one. So what is the difference here, Paula? Okay, so this side, the whole face is kind of lime green. And this one, you've lessened some of that intensity. You've also changed some of the colors in the background. Interesting. So there's a lot of different... You're really playing with these two paintings and the colors. And they almost look like totally different paintings. And you've also done a little bit of work on the other eye. I mean, I guess it's hard to say which. If I was to say which one do I prefer, I like different aspects of these ones for different reasons. There's something quite bold about that really bright, cold green, right? It almost looks a little bit like glow-in-the-dark Halloween kind of colors, almost a little intense. That, especially, yeah, I think we want that to be just a little bit more muted, which is what I think maybe you did that one and then did this one after. Or did you paint over? No, it looks like they're two different paintings. Anyway, very interesting. I gotta move on here, but I love that you're really experimenting and trying different things here. Here's Maria's version of the same painting. First of all, I love the brush work here. Your textures that you're building up here are really gorgeous. Like, just the way that everything's painted in the background. I feel like this would have been like, you're kind of painting quickly and quite boldly and quite confidently here. Her chin looks like it's a little bit smaller than the original, but I don't mind it. She just looks a slightly different personality, but I think this turned out really, really nice. Maybe I would also say potentially the eyes are a little bit close together. I always say, if in doubt, just in my style, if in doubt, to move the eyes further away. I think the closer eyes get, it can be a little bit odd. But of course, one of the most famous artists of all time, Amedeo Modigliani, and we're going to be doing a couple of paintings of his over the next month, is very famous for having eyes that are very close together. So, and two of his paintings sold for over, I think, $125 million over the past few decades. So, who's to say? But it does feel like maybe, like there's a lot of space on the sides of these eyes. So maybe just thinking about that, like maybe pushing them a little bit further away. Like, at the very least, I would say you should be able to fit another eye in between your eyes. So for instance, we look at this, if we just take one of these eyes, we should be able to put it in between here, which would mean, let's just say we push this one over, the corner of this eye might be, right here where the iris begins, right? Or we could move both of them a little bit further away, and, probably that would mean the corner, this edge here would move to here, and this would move to here. Again, tiny little details, but for those interested in sort of learning, that would be some of the solutions. Wow, Laurie, I love the brushwork in here. Really cool. Again, very kind of aggressive, fast, confident brushwork. It does feel like this jaw is making making Matisse's wife look a little bit more masculine. Like, it starts to look again like some 5 o'clock shadow kind of happening here, or stubble, So to rectify that, probably what I would do is just taper this in, like this little area here. Something is not working there. And just kind of push this out a little bit. and then I try to get rid of some of these really dark shades under there. The other thing too, like with women especially, or even men, like that, it's really tricky to do that top lip, because if it looks a little bit too dark, it can make it look like you're doing a kind of a shorthand for very subtle stubble. Say that 100 times. And I see Isaac there in the chat. Isaac, I've got your images from Instagram. I think those are the ones you sent me, right? Because it's not your name on Instagram's not Isaac, so I just want to make sure that your drawings, right, that you sent, there they are. We're going to look at them the first thing when we get to our artwork that you guys have done on your own. And then here, lastly, Heidi. That is interesting. It doesn't. Her face looks as a different likeness than the original, but I don't mind it like that. Like, she looks like a different woman, but there's something that kind of works with this. It's a little bit asymmetrical, so you can see her jaw is, you know, quite different on one side than the other. And generally you want to try to usually make them quite aligned, or symmetrical. You know, this eye is obviously much higher as well, like the midpoint of that eye would probably be here. But again, most people don't have symmetrical faces, right? Most of us have one eye that's a little bit higher than the other, etc. You know, it almost has a bit of a cubist thing that, you know, her face might appear to be kind of turning slightly, and it's captured at that moment. Yeah, not sure what else I could say here. Maybe there's a lot of white in here. Maybe if we just had the paint with just a little bit less white. I don't know. I'd have to look at the original. But either, I mean, again, I like the way it's painted. I just think it looks maybe not quite exactly. It's a definitely a different person. Okay, let's move on here and look at the famous Blue Nude, which was originally a collage, and I did this one as a painting and as a collage again. And this is a paint I remember a couple decades ago. I was staying with some friends, and we went, and I was visiting them for like a month, I think. And so I went and got a whole bunch of paper, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to do a bunch of Matisse collages. They're so easy. I'm going to make a bunch of them, and I'm going to sell them while I'm visiting. And after like the first afternoon, I realized, wow, doing these Matisse cutouts is like a lot more difficult than I ever thought they were. They just look so easy. And that's exactly what Matisse wants you to think. He wants you to think they look so easy. All of his work so effortless. Until you try it, you're like, oh my goodness. Anyway, Heidi says, sorry, Michael, the sketching was frustrating on that one. Definitely, yeah. I mean, doing portraits can be a little bit tricky for sure. Getting the proportions and likeness is tricky. You know, one of the things that you can do if you are really having difficulty with a face is literally take a mirror and let me see if I can. I'll just there's the camera right up above here. Let me see. Do I have a... Let's use this here, or Botticelli. So this is a painting I was not too happy with after I finished it, right? Actually, this was not gonna work quite as well. How about this one? I don't know if this will work on camera, but one thing you can do is, you know, put a mirror here, and then if you sort of look at it kind of right down the middle, if it's totally symmetrical, that, okay, so you can't, let me see, maybe it's not the best, but you can kind of, like, so that's, and sometimes a totally symmetrical face is a little bit weird, but, you know, if you were to do this and you look at it and it looks wildly different than when you take the mirror off, that would give you an idea that the symmetry is off, right? So you could do this with this particular painting because she's looking directly at us. Anyway, let's continue here. So here's let's look at all of them together. There's Laurie's, Paula's, Roxana's, and Tanya's. So how about let's just start here with Tanya. Oops, wasn't on camera. Let's do it again. So we'll look at Tanya's, Roxana, Paula's, Laurie's, and Heidi. So a lot of very different approaches to this painting, which is, I always love seeing the same thing done many different times. So let's start here. I think this turned out really well, Heidi. It looks like we clipped a little bit of the bottom down here. Maybe just when you were sketching it out, we ran out of room, which doesn't bother me, and it kind of actually works nice down there like that. I really like the colors you got. I love this kind of eggshell color, little bit of warmth in there, a little bit of peachy, pinky colors in there. I think complements this cool blue really well. Because they are complementary colors, right? So just as a quick little reminder here, you know, when we have colors like this is, you know, when it comes to, like, for designers, or often pair the opposite, or you can even think a even better example is like sports teams almost always have complementary color schemes. Almost always choose a color that is opposite from one another. Like, for instance, I'm a big let me just show you here. Like, I'm a big fan of the Los Angeles Kings because I lived there for so long, and I got to go to a bunch of events and met a lot of the great players there. But here we see purple and yellow complementary colors, right? We got purple and yellow, right? It's not exactly right across. In fact, some people might call this a split complementary. That's a whole other thing, because actually it's got a pretty warm yellow. So actually it's almost, yeah, it just looks like a complementary color. But that's a really strong, probably one of the most classical color mixing, matching strategies, I would say. So in your painting, what you've got here is you've got your cold blue, and then you've got this kind of peachy color. Obviously there's white in it, and it pulls it, you know, towards the neutral core. But it's just a very flattering thing. Now maybe that's what Matisse did. I can't remember what the original is or what I showed in the episode, but Isaac says, I love the blue and yellow color combo. My favorite team uses those colors too, right? So that's also like the Lakers colors. The Los Angeles Lakers basketball team uses a similar color scheme. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. Looks great, Heidi. Let's look at Laurie's here. Wow, that is wild. So looks like we've got some sort of paint pouring happening. I was wondering if this was painted on paper and then cut out and glued, but it looks like Laurie has taped it down. It looks like this kind of eggshell color was done over top of the background. It's hard to tell. It really got me kind of interested how that is, or maybe, I don't know. I don't know which came first. I keep seeing, it almost makes me think you did one and then maybe taped them both, inverted the tape or something. Anyway, and I love that. That's one of my favorite things. I'm that weirdo at the art gallery when you're walking and you see someone looking at the painting from the side, looking at the edge of the painting, you know, doing all sorts of weird things, and you're walking by like, what is that guy doing? Is he trying to steal that thing? Or is he looking for security cameras or something? What's going on? Often the security guards come over and are like, excuse me, sir, please stand a little further back from the painting. Because I'm always, I love, you know, that's one of my favorite things to do when I go to an art gallery, is to really, it's like it's the opportunity to get up close with an artwork and to really try to understand it. It's often what we do at the beginning of one of these episodes, where I'm looking at the digital file and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And there's nothing like doing it when you're actually in person. Heidi says, you are too nice. They're acrylic skins. Okay, so this looks, okay, so acrylic skins. Acrylic skins. This is, I'm not sure. Do you mean you painted on and then you cut it out? It looks like it's painted all there. I'm not sure. Not sure what we're talking about. Or are you talking about this one, Heidi? I'm not sure. Anyway, this looks great, Lori. Really, really cool. I love that you took the composition and then did some really wild, innovative thing to it as well. Really cool. Let's move on here to Paula's. That is so interesting, Paula, that your choice to paint the painting in this way. I love it. So we've got the I guess painted version, and then this is the collage that you glued right over top of it. What I think is neat about this is it kind of makes it look like that there's, let's say this is the model sitting in front of the finished painting, right? Which is a motif that we saw a lot in, especially the art of Picasso. Matisse also did this. A lot of those artists lived, I don't know what it was, but there was a lot of artists, you know, at the turn of the last century in Paris who were really obsessed with the image of the artist painting the nude model. And often they would do paintings of the artist's studio with the artist making a painting and almost always a nude woman in the background, and we would see both the nude woman and the nude figure painting that's being created based on it. As I said, Picasso was obsessed with this type of scenario. So it's very interesting that you've put them together like that, because, you know, it almost sort of total, you know, it looks like I see this on social media all the time, where people will, let's say you go to a museum and there's a picture of I don't know, a painting of someone going like, oh, and then you'll see a bunch of people will take their picture in front of it, like doing the same sort of thing, right? So those are always kind of quite funny, right? Or assuming the same pose. So that sort of almost looks like what we have here. So it's very clever. Roxana's version here. Wow. So this one looks, you know, like there's no tape involved. Roxana's tried to paint the entire painting just by hand. So it's got a little bit more of a brushy quality as opposed to kind of the sharpness that is just innate in a collage, because you're using scissors, which are going to create like the sharpest line possible, right? Because it's been cut. So this, it's interesting doing it like that. Like, it almost makes me think, again, maybe pushing it even further. Like, if you're in a situation like this and you might find it kind of frustrating, kind of painting around all these things, is if you were to do this more as like an impressionist painting and really allow, or a Van Gogh painting, and really allow the brushstrokes to live on their own and not try to hide them or anything. So, and it almost sort of looks like that's happening in this painting. There's a quite confident use of the brush there. I like that. I think the background might be a little bit too prominent, maybe a little bit more white, just to calm it down, to tint it so that it's not quite as powerful, and like the values. I think we want that blue to be maybe just more stronger contrast, which we see, let's say, if we look at it, like Heidi's here, we have the background color is quite subtle. But again, either way, I really like it. And here's Tanya's as well. Wow. It's interesting the way you've painted this too, Tanya, is we have some areas are much darker and some areas which are lighter. And that could just be because along the edges you're painting over a few times, and so it's getting more opaque and less transparent. Less of the paper is coming through. So these areas look lighter, whereas these areas look darker because you've sort of maybe done a little bit of fiddling around there, which maybe was a little frustrating when you were working on it. And obviously you could just take a bigger brush and just paint a few more layers on it, and it's going to get more and more solid, that blue. But I kind of really like it because it starts to give volume to this form. Like what we have here is what we call like modeling or shading, right? And especially like on her thigh here, like it gets much darker down here towards her buttocks, of course, right? But here on this part of her thigh, it's like, it looks like a highlight there. Same thing like on her face here, right? This would be her kind of, her eye is almost like this is a brow, and her hair being darker, or on her breasts or her shoulder. So, and as this goes down, like this might be an area that is in shadow, and so it's much darker. So it's funny how, I mean, it's maybe you did all that deliberately, and if so, that's amazing. But if not, it can be really, interesting to see how sometimes something that we do isn't having the effect we originally wanted, but it's doing something else that maybe we do want. And I remember I had a teacher when I was in art school who said, his favorite thing, or why he likes looking at art, is it's always challenging him to be aware of how open he is to accepting new things. That art, great art, always causes a little bit of like when you see it can often raise some pretty intense emotions. Because sometimes you see it and like, oh, I hate that. That's garbage. Right? And then afterwards you're like, was that genius? Wait, I'm sure you might have had that experience seeing a movie where you just leave and you're like, oh, it's awful. And then on the ride home, you're thinking about it. And then the next morning, you're thinking about it. And then you're thinking, I want to see that movie again. Like, the more I think about it, it's gotten into my head. And is that not a bad movie, but maybe one of the best movies I've ever seen? That has got me, And so that is like, I think one of the great things with art, because it really challenges us to sort of get over ourselves and our preconceived notions about how things are supposed to be. And then you see something that is sort of defies your notion of how things are supposed to be, and you have two options. One is to be like, nope, it's bad, I refuse to accept it as anything other than bad. Or you start having that like, maybe I have to adjust my sense of taste or what I think is good or bad, and maybe I was wrong, right? And I'll tell you, that is one of the neatest things. One of the things I make my students do in art school is we have, you know, that book, it's called The Art Book, and there's a small version of it, and there's also a much larger version. They're almost identical, so you can get them from the library. It's called literally The Art Book, and we go through that book. I actually have a video of me flipping through page by page, which each page is on the screen for about like 4 seconds, and I have a list of everything on there, and I make the students just sort of, you know, put a check mark. I'm trying to think what if you like it, you put a check mark, or no, if you like it, you circle it. If you don't like it, you cross it out, and if you're kind of ambivalent, you just leave it. Right? I think that's, I'm trying to remember my own assignment. And we go through that whole book, and I think there's maybe 200 names in there, and with the idea, and then I have them write down all of the names of the artists that they did like, or at least that artwork by that artist. So we have a list of artists that you like, and then you have a list of artists that you don't like, and then the artists that you just feel ambivalent about, you just leave that, right? And I did that all by myself out of, I don't know, nowhere, when I was a student at the Royal College in London, and I remember I did it in a journal, and I actually found that journal years later, and I saw that list, and I was like, oh, you know what would be interesting? Before I even look at that list, I'm going to do this again. And I did it, and I compared notes, and I would say about half of those names flipped from hate to love, and even some back the other way, from going from these are artists I love this painting, to ugh, I can't stand that. And that was like a real eye-opener. I didn't do that deliberately. I just evolved in my thinking about art. And so I would encourage, if you're interested, to do something similar, right? And because it really helps identify maybe what your current interests are or are not. And sometimes even just identifying what you're not interested in can be just as interesting and useful as what you are interested in. Okay, so Pascal, I think, sent a bunch here. We got really into Matisse, so I just want to take a look at a bunch of these ones that Pascal submitted here, which we didn't do in class. But since we're talking about Matisse, I just thought I would throw this in right here. So, some of these I'm not sure if I'm familiar with some of these paintings, or I am, but I can't remember how they were originally done. So I'll just sort of that looks pretty cool. There's maybe a lengthening of the body here, and the shrinking of the head, which is something Matisse did in his own artwork. In this instance, it seems fine. It does make me feel like her belly, you know, like, where is her belly button? Like, I think technically it should be right about here, but now it's somewhere behind her arm, which is making her whole torso really, really long. Like, this arm, for instance, I think would probably come right across here. So we have almost like an extra arm length, not arm length, you know, kind of, you know, it's that extra length of arm coming so down here, which makes it look a little bit unusual, but I don't mind it. I mean, as I said, like, it does look, I mean, maybe this is actually by Matisse. I don't know. So I think this is the original Matisse. I think this might be at the Norton Simon in Pasadena, California. Maybe, correct me if I'm wrong. And this looks like Pascal's version of it. So, you know, a couple things. You know, one thing we can do is just look at the skin tones that we have here, the colors, the hues that he's chosen. She looks almost like sickly pale, these colors. I think she's trying to sleep, but you know, these same colors almost match the pillows around her. Her arms are a little bit lighter, but it is, I mean, even just Matisse's choice to do that is kind of strange, whereas yours, a much more radical difference between her skin tones and the colors in the background, because these values, like this is much more white than this, right? Whereas if I just sort of close my eyes and look at these, they are very close. You know, like her arm down here is definitely, this is the point of highest contrast between, let's say, her skin color and the fabric. Not that I mind. The other thing too is this is her arm is folded in behind her hair, and so maybe it needs at least some sort of line here to show that, right? Now Matisse didn't do that. He's got some very subtle outlines happening here, but you've got some much more bold outlines happening, and I think we need a bit more of a bold outline here to emphasize that. Otherwise this starts to look like it's some sort of gigantic ear that is emerging from the side of her face. Do you see what I mean here? Like her face is drooping or pouring into this shape, or it's slurping her face away or something. Tiny detail. I'm not sure why Matisse painted it like that. That is very odd, but that's the image you're studying from, and that's I do like that you did this one, which is way different. Really reinterpreted it. That's quite, I mean, I think these, because that, yeah, that's the other arm. That is wild. That's weird. And this is another one. This one I really like. I think that one turned out really well. I actually really like the way that you're drawing these hands, and there's a looseness to it that I'm trying to think whose work really, maybe it is Matisse, the way that he kind of really quickly draws features like that. Anyway, I want to move on. I'm just killing time here. We're still okay. Let's look at Paul Klee. Gone way too slow. Okay, so I'm going to pick up the pace just a little bit in the interest of trying to get through all of these paintings. So that was Robbins. Kathy. So this is the cat with bird. Okay. So how about we start down here? I wonder, is this finished, Tanya? Because it looks maybe a little unfinished up here. Not that I mind that either. That is cool. I think this is maybe just a little bit unfinished, but it definitely looks like what we have here has turned out really well. So I think probably, I'm assuming, as once it got done, you must have been quite happy with it. Here's Roxana's. That is wild, Roxana. It definitely is a little bit darker, more brown. And then these kind of lines that you've drawn over top, it kind of looks like a Sharpie or something on there, which I know we've talked about before, but again, I'm always discouraging the Sharpie, but I just think these are maybe just a little bit dark. I think we want a little bit more orange and peachy colors in here. Not bad. But I think one of the things with this painting is there's a lightness to this. So this is starting to look a little bit more severe. This is more dramatic than playful, I think. But, you know, again, it's one of those things, if you do it a second time, I think you would do it probably much different. And which just feel like, oh, I wish I had done this the first time. But hey, that's the way a lot of things are, right? We learn from our mistakes, and often that's the only way we learn, right? And sometimes if you do it perfectly the first time, you're like, wow, it must be amazing. And then you try to do something else, you're like, oh, actually, I was just really lucky the first time. And here's Paula's. Wow, so this is kind of the exact opposite. These colors are almost too intense, like these, that lime color in the background. And this now, rather than a bird, it looks like a mouse or something. That's quite funny. I like all these colors. It's just very, very different. A totally different interpretation of this painting. Very cool. I'm just going to keep on going ahead. Wow. Lori, that is great. So that's pretty darn close to the original, for sure. And I'll just look at Roxana's here. I think, you know, if we look at Roxana, you could see how much darker and maybe less less joyful colors. Like, one of the things, you know, like I've mentioned many times, like in most paintings there's a lot of brown or a lot of gray or gray, or maybe even black or even white. So an artist use those three colors, gray, black, white, and brown, and then add pops of more intense color, and those really intense colors really shine or appear to be even more intense because they're surrounded by more muted colors. Here we just have mostly muted colors, and I think we want more intense. Like, we've got this fairly bright red here, but you know, if we look at you know, like Lori's here, we could see there's some of these oranges and reds. There's just like these eyes blasting through, and I think that's, you know, that only really happens because we've got that brown in here. But it's a balance, and it's easier said than done, for sure, getting that balance right. But that is really nice, Lori. That is great. That might be better than the one I did. Great, really, really nice. Wow, Heidi, I like that a lot. That is really interesting. I like that it looks like you've basically painted over all the black lines with kind of like oranges and reds. Maybe a little bit of a brown. That is really cool. No, I can't quite remember how Paul Klee did that. Did he do black or blue, or did he use that? I don't think he did it like that, but I think this is better. That is really interesting. I feel like that shows me this painting in a very different way that just looks softer and maybe more playful even than the original. That is cool. Really great strategy. Right? And I see Tanya says, Heidi, like, it's amazing. So well done. So that's great, because these are the things that like other people watching can take and be like, oh, that's a great solution. Let's take that and I'm going to put this into my Paul Klee painting or into any other painting, right? I mean, because often one of the things that we often do is just use a black to outline. And even people will use a black Sharpie or even a black Posca pen to outline. And this is just a good reminder that we can use a green Posca pen or a purple Posca pen in lieu of black, because it just gives something a bit more life. Black or white tend to be fairly dead colors in my opinion, right? And so having more life, that's why I like mixing my own black, is it will necessarily inject some life into those darker areas, because there's going to be some maybe slight variations in what that black is when I mix it my own. Heidi says, I don't think it was black lined. Interesting. Well, I mean, maybe I that's how I showed it in the episode. I can't remember, or maybe that's just what everyone did. You never know. That's why that's one of the reasons why I don't show the original when we do this, because I don't want us just to be like comparing, oh, look how you failed to do what the master did. I want us to just try to looking at these on their own and just appreciating them for what they are, right? That's cool, Kathy. That looks great too. Again, these like greens and blues and oranges and pinks and reds, lots of really vibrant color in there, and I think that really, really helps. And even we've got a little bit of grays in here, right? I didn't even really think about that, but that also really helps make the rest of those bright colors, saturated colors, pop. That's wild. Very cool. Great stuff. And then here's one Robin included, which I'm not familiar with this specific Paul Klee, but there was another, I might have even been in the Dropbox folder. There's a few more that he did using this style. Like Paul Klee, I probably mentioned in the episode when we did Paul Klee, you know, he's sort of seen as sort of the most childlike artist of all, like the one that most people be like, oh, my kid could do that. They all look like they were done by elementary school kids. But Paul Klee was probably one of the most serious painters in terms of his interest in like color and color theory. And it's again, it's like if you think of like Kandinsky or Malevich, like a lot of artists who often get labeled with this, you know, childlike, or, you know, they're you know, not, they're just too easily done, that kind of dismissive kind of language. Often, ironically, they're the ones who think most seriously about color, and that's what often I think interests them about about using color in a fairly straightforward way. It's almost like, I think, like a, you know, like a really good chef. Often a really good chef actually makes very simple meals. Like that's one of the things, you know, as I've gotten older and my wife and I go to a really nice restaurant, often, you know, things are, rather than a whole bunch of wild and crazy stuff and tons of different tastes, everything is just like very fresh and very specific, and you're like, wow, like it gives you the sense that I could do this at home, but it's just done perfectly, right? So, you know, same sort of thing, like, you know, I don't eat meat, but you know, that idea of like a perfectly done steak barely needs any seasoning in it, right? Because it's just like done perfectly. Whereas maybe someone who really doesn't know how to cook very well is just going to load it with barbecue sauce and salt and pepper and all sorts of spices, and by the end you could be eating your shoe. You're just like, I don't know, there's so much sauce on here, I can't really taste it. Anyway, long story short, I like Paul Klee. Really nicely done here. That's great, Robin. It's funny to me, sometimes people will do different paintings by the same artist while we're doing that episode. And hey, you know, if you're not interested in the painting that I'm doing by that artist, find another painting by them, and you can still tune in and paint along and ask questions and all that kind of stuff as well, right? And speaking of which, I did just post some of the upcoming paintings, like next class. Oh, on Tuesday we're painting the Stanley Cup, because the hockey playoffs are going on right now. And then on Thursday we're painting a painting by Picasso of Dora Maar, that is another one of the most expensive paintings of all time. Okay, anyway, let's we're going to move on to Paul Cézanne and the Mulse Victoire painting. So let's look at those, and there's a few other ones you see there by some other people. I think we got about 10 people did this one. So here's, wow, very different. Whoa. Wow. Wow. What's happening there? Whoa. Okay. That's okay. So that's, look how the same, I think they're all the same painting, just done slightly differently. Where should we start at the end and work our way back up here? Okay. First of all, I think it's great to see people nailing the colors of Cézanne, right? And I think here, Susan, you've got the color palette that Cézanne used really, really well executed. Because Cézanne often used, especially towards the latter half of his life, this color palette almost exclusively. So getting that, I think, is really helpful and important. It really just puts you right into the ballpark. I like that there's in your version almost like a lyrical use of these marks. Like one of the things, Paul Cézanne is sort of seen as like the father of Cubism, even though he had nothing to do with Cubism. Cubism was quote unquote invented by Georges Braque and Pablo Picasso decades later. Cézanne, his interest in sort of getting to the almost the Platonic forms that underlie all of reality is sort of a key theme in his work, and he was really exploring using kind of geometric shapes to get there. And so often he was using these kind of cubes and triangles, hard angles and straight lines to do that, right? Which is again how Cubism was a derisive term that was used to ridicule what Picasso and Braque had created. But if they were like, yeah, I know you're trying to make fun of us by calling us cubists, but we kind of like it. It kind of seems just works perfectly. So, but here anyway, long story short, is there are all of these kind of arcing shapes or serpentine lines are a little twist on Cézanne that I think is really interesting and maybe worth doing some more investigating of that, because again, that's your own style kind of coming through here. Wow. And Robin's got a few, so I'm trying to see which one is first. What's the difference here? That one, is that just the same, just with different lighting? I think, are these exactly the same, just lit differently? I think they are. So I'm not sure which one is closer to the original. I prefer this one, so I'm going to say this is closer to the original. It's more subtle. Like this one seems to have, like much darker shapes in here, whereas in here everything's quite muted. There's a lot of white in here. Like I think there's white in every color, honestly, except maybe this green, and which is not necessarily a bad thing. They're like Giorgio Morandi, the Italian painter who did still lifes almost exclusively through his entire life. Almost every brushstroke he ever painted has got lots of white in it, which makes those paintings kind of almost dreamlike. So here, having a lot of white and everything makes it look like you're painting a mountain which is really far away, like you're almost looking through a telescope at or binoculars at mountains really far away, and we don't even see anything anywhere near us. So everything has a bit of that kind of atmospheric quality. Versus, if we just look at Susan's here, these darker colors, more saturated colors, bring it forward, especially compared to the sky. Now, I don't mind that. It could actually, I could see you making a whole career out of this, but it's just something to think about, because Cézanne did use white in his colors, but not everywhere. And when we put white into a color or gray into a color, it usually it'll push that color backwards into the background, right? Especially, I think you can even see that happening here, where there's even more white back here, and it pushes this far mountain further away than these hills which are in front of it. So that's working well, but imagine if we had some lines that didn't have any white in them at all. They would be like miles in front of even this. So I'm just going to continue. This is great, Richard. That is really, really nice. I also really like your brushstroke application here. This is the kind of thing that would make Cézanne or Braque or Picasso really excited, because this is also requires a great deal of patience. And because, probably our instinct when we get paint on our paintbrush is to really just fill everything in. And just if there's a gap, you just go right in there and you plug the gap, like as if it's a boat with a hole in it, right? You're stuffing rags in there so no water comes out. Artists like Cézanne and those that were inspired by him left a lot of canvas, raw canvas, exposed and coming through the paint, which is like, if you've never painted in that way, it's like really hard to allow that to happen, because your instinct is to go like, oh look, there's some white here, I'm gonna paint that over, I gotta fill that up, oh look, there's white, oh, and before you know it, everything's completely covered, like cake icing on top of the form, right? So I'm very impressed that you were able to show that level of restraint here. It's funny because those are, to some people, they look at that type of thing as like a sign of laziness or unfinishedness, or it's an underpainting. And whereas Cézanne felt that it showed like there was a truthfulness to it. He wasn't trying to hide anything. There's not any attempt at illusionism. He's trying to go past, through the illusion of reality at the things that are underneath everything. Whether you agree that there's something underneath the structure of everything, like Plato believed, or not, is a whole other thing. But it requires, so people think it's very lazy, but to do that requires almost the exact opposite type of behavior, of being like, okay, I have to stop. I'm gonna leave that white there. I so want to paint that white, but I'm just gonna leave it, right? That's hard to do. So that's great. Really nice job, Richard. Wow, Paula. Totally different, right? I love these, right? So very different colors, a quite bright color palette. I think you've, what would I say? Like especially if we were looking back at Susan's here. So we see that, you know, we have some white mixed into some of the colors to give it a bit more of a muted pastel quality. So I think there could be maybe a little bit more white, maybe in your greens in certain areas. The only thing we need is like a little bit of brown in there, just a little bit. But again, I can't remember the original. This just has like a very late spring, early summer kind of, or fall kind of, like all of these colors. It just looks very saturated. And it's interesting because we've seen a few of your paintings today, Paula, where we have like a very saturated palette, and it might be worth just thinking of how we can have more contrast between saturation. And so when I say saturation, right, like these, the colors when they come right out of the tube, the colors that I use for this series, right, are warm reds and cool reds, or warm blues and cool blues, and right, those are all like very saturated colors. Right, they're almost there are paints that we can get that are synthetic pigments that are actually even more saturated. They're almost fluorescent, like really intense colors that don't occur naturally in nature, except maybe where there's highlights, like light shining on them really intensely. But anyway, these are so. What we have here is the most saturated colors we can get with this split primary palette. As we start mixing them across, we start desaturating them, right? So, you know, if you have like a really saturated warm blue, just adding a little bit of a color that's, you know, either directly across, a complementary color, or a split complementary color, or what that's going to do is just yank that color closer to the neutral chord, take away some of its intensity. So I think, you know, if we look back at yours, Paula, here, even just taking like this bright green, and if we add, you know, so that green that you're using, you know, it looks like we've got that green, we've got that yellow, maybe you've got maybe a little bit of blue, or sorry, red in there. So we're painting with a lot of very saturated colors. We do have a little bit of white in them that just pulls it in here. But instead of adding white into those colors, if we instead just added a little bit of blue in here, we're gonna get a brown. It'll be kind of existing here. If we took this green and we added maybe just a little bit of red here, it'll pull it a little bit in, right? Or you can instead just mix a green this way. So anyway, just a few little things there. Here's another one by Paula, a mountainscape. This painting might not have anything to do with Cezanne, but it does sort of have a similar composition, but you've added these buildings in the foreground. So I can't quite remember what the description would have been here. This is interesting. We've got a lot of very different colors. I like that you've got these cool blues up here. So that's really going to pull the sky sort of backwards into space. The one thing is we've got a lot of this really cool green right in our foreground. And that creates a bit of, what that does is like, let's say this painting, let's say if we'll just crop it like that. That works not bad, because we've got this cool blue sky. We've got some of this cool lemony green here, so it's kind of pulls backwards. We've got some white, So again, all that's pulling backwards, and then we've got a little bit more warmer browns and warm reds. So those are going to sit naturally in the foreground. But then we also have in our foreground all of this bright, cool green. And so what that does is it sort of, you know, let's say you've got your mountain and that's supposed to be way in front. You know, if it was come up, it would obscure part of that mountain. Well, what it does, it almost sort of like kind of swings back here and flattens that space, right? Now, again, the whole Cubist revolution was all about flattening space, and some people would even go so far as to say that, you know, the story of 20th century art was all about flattening the picture plane, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. Most of the greatest artists of the last 100 years really flirted with that, but if I generally suspect most people watching are less interested in those kind of high concepts of art, and more just want to paint the world around them as they see it and have it be believable. And that's why using warm colors in your foreground, cool colors in the background, can really help create that depth. And if that's something that one struggles with, I think really like looking at paintings by artists that you do like, and just trying to study them, like reproducing them and seeing if you can make those paintings again, is really helpful. And that's what we're doing in all these master studies series, right? I'm trying to think if there's another when the next landscape is coming up. I'll have to think about that we can. Let me just even look at the schedule. When's the next landscape? We're doing a bunch of portraits. We are doing Van Gogh's irises in 2 weeks. That's one of the great ones of all time. One of the most expensive paintings of all time. I guess in July we've got a number of landscapes. Few at the beginning of July. Anyway, all will be revealed. Let's move a couple more. I think we'll do maybe one more artist after. Wow, there's. I don't know if we're okay. Well, I'd have to pick up my pace if I want to get all the way down to David Shrigley today. So we'll see. Here I was going to catch us up much, and here I am. Anyway, so Maria, that is great. Wow, that is amazing. So it almost looks like you did this with like a stamp, or a sponge or something. Maybe you did use a sponge for this. Now I gotta look at, what did you write here? I started painting the background still yellow, so I went back and forth with the colors until I achieved some kind of ivory canvas effect. I liked it very much, even though I was resistant to start this one. Okay. An ivory quality. Not sure what that means, but that turned out really cool. Yeah, it looks like a print or something. But really, you know, again, beautiful, cool blue sky. And then we've got warmer colors in the foreground, these warm greens. Even this kind of purple here leans a little bit more towards our warm blue. So, right, like this area of the color wheel can be a little bit confusing for people, because this is the one place where everything sort of switches. But oddly enough, like purple, when it gets here, actually gets a little bit warmer because we're getting closer to our warm blue, versus when it goes this way, it actually gets a little bit cooler because it's approaching our cool red, and then they sort of flip. Everything else works, which is, I know it can be kind of confusing, and this is why throughout history there have been a number of artists that have done funky things with their purples, including making like color wheels that sort of then invert and sort of turn into a figure 8, because they're just like, that doesn't make any sense. I can't, that doesn't, it doesn't work. It's not clean. I need to do something to, so anyway, I don't want to go too much in there because it can be a little bit, it's a little more confusing than I think I want to get into. But suffice to say, there's many people who've done many different color wheels trying to overcome some of these things. Yeah, great job, Maria. That's really nice. I also like the way that you sort of created this frame on the canvas itself. Very cool job. Wow, Heidi, that is great. So this is definitely a different Cezanne painting, but really nice. You like, look at how these really, they're not fully saturated, but they are warm colors, warm oranges and reds and warm yellows right here in the foreground. It just like it pulls that foreground right towards us, right? Again, in contrast here to Paula, here are these cool greens in the foreground, kind of does that weird thing where it's pulling those trees, which are supposed to be the closest thing to us, backwards into the space. Whereas here, Heidi's done a masterful job of keeping those warm colors in the foreground. And even though we might have warmer colors in the background, if we add a little bit of white to them, it sort of counteracts that push, right? And it's pulling it backwards. Great job here, Heidi. That's really exciting because, again, it really shows your understanding of a lot of the things that we've been talking about over the course of these past few years. Really nice. That's a great version of that. I don't know which Cezanne paint. Maybe this is one you came up with on your own. I don't know, but it looks great. And there's Deborah's. Wow. And so that is very abstract now. It barely registers as a landscape beyond the colors that we have. So that's wild. I'm interested to know what the motivation for painting it like that is. I wonder, did the painting just sort of get away from you and you're just like, I'm just going to have fun with it, which is good too. You know, sometimes rather than fighting with a painting is to dance with it a little bit, right? You just go, hey, okay, you're not cooperating with me. We can go back and forth, trading blows back and forth, or we can just play with one. We can just go for a little dance, right? And this is a great example. I mean, I don't know exactly what happened, but that's the way that I read it. I feel like, because I see all these layers here. That are sometimes layers can mean different things. It can mean that someone's really carefully building up the surface, or that someone is kind of struggled and had to paint things out over and over and wasn't kind of going the way they wanted. It's hard to say because there's a little bit of the shine happening here. Those dark lines, I would consider bringing more dark lines into the foreground, because again, those darker lines, just like cool color or just like warm colors, want to advance, versus the less like your more subtle value contrasts you want in the background. So I feel like if this is a dark line up here, then we would usually want at least that same level of value, like darker line, to at least be that same darkness in the foreground, if not darker, right? Okay. Tanya says that's the version from the Barnes Foundation collection. You know, Cezanne did probably 400 or 500 paintings of this same mountain, Mont Saint-Victoire, because he might have gone to, you know, Mont Saint-Victoire is down in the south of France in a town called Aix-en-Provence, and I love, that's probably my favorite place on earth is southern France. And there's a reason why so many artists lived and painted in that area, because the light is just gorgeous. The weather is fantastic almost all year round. But Cezanne, he might have traveled to Paris a few times. He might have gone a little further south to the Mediterranean, but he lived and died within a few blocks of where he was born. And he was kind of a bit of a reclusive, odd character. So he painted the same things over and over throughout his career. Okay. How are we doing with time? Let's look at these Michelangelo paintings. And this is, let's look at them all together. There's Paula's, Sandra's, wow. Wow, okay. So we just have the 3 paintings by the 3 different people who approached this one. Again, I know that there's probably dozens more people that did all of these paintings, but so many people feel quite self-conscious about sharing that artwork because they feel like, oh, I don't know if it's going to be good enough, and I don't want to be embarrassed. But really, that's the way that we get better and we grow. So that's why I'm so honored that there's so many of you who have been so brave to share your artwork, so that we can use this as teaching tools for those people that are still trying to get up the courage to let those artworks out into the world, right? And because I think it gives people permission. I'm sure there's a few people who watch this and be like, oh, these just look like what I did. Mine aren't so bad. Oh, hey, this is I'm doing pretty good, right? And that's the way you should feel. I'm sure there's a few people like, oh man, these are so much better than mine. I don't think what you're doing is that bad. And we all start somewhere, right? So how about let's start right here. Let's talk about Sandra's versions of these this version of Michelangelo here. So there's, you know what's interesting? It almost looks like, Sandra, did you do something in Photoshop after this? Or is it just because it looks slightly different? Maybe not. Either way, let's just look at this version here. Or maybe we can just zoom in a bit. This one seems to have a lot more texture that we don't quite see in this here. Either way, I really like how this was painted. This is an instance where I think these outlines work quite well. And we talked about in that episode how those outlines are probably more a feature of the fresco painting process than and because this is painted like 5 floors up on the ceiling, right? So most people, you know, like would have throughout human history, when this was painted in, let's have 15 off the top of my head, when was Sistine Chapel painted? 1507 or something around there, and for a few years, so let's say 1505, 1512 or something like that, right? Most people never saw this that close. You know, that would have been this tiny little detail way up there on the ceiling. So they would never really seen these outlines. But I bet you Michelangelo probably made them even more visible than they were, just to help for clarity's sake. Because it's not like people, you know, if you have a painting on the wall and you just kind of put your nose literally right up to it. Can't do that with the Sistine Chapel, right? Sandra says one version is scanned in. It's 600 DPI scan. Interesting. I guess that, but it's just it's interesting because it does sort of hide some of the texture. Not that the texture is bad or anything, but it makes it look, you know, almost like this is a digital illustration done on an iPad or something. Which is a good thing to think about too for anyone who's like Sandra, a little bit familiar with technology. Is we can make art that, you know, might start in the computer. Maybe it's a photograph you take on your phone and you transfer it to your computer and you change some of the colors and you crop it or enlarge it or add different things. Then you print it out and make a painting with it. Most people see that as like a one-way street, right? That it's sort of, we start with the computer and then we end with the real painting. There is no reason, however, that it can't go back the other way, that it can't start on a canvas with paint, get scanned into the computer, and then played with on the computer, and then even painted on, or the colors inverted, and then that could be printed out as a poster or as a postcard or iPhone cover. Or I've been getting a lot of ads on social media lately for printing your images on clothing and fabric. I don't know why, but so you can do all sorts of different things with those images. And some people are like, oh, but it's cheating if I make a painting on canvas and then I fix it on the computer. It's like, why? I mean, often more people will see your images that you post to Facebook than they'll ever see of them in person. And I mean that just, you know, the paintings that I have made that have been on display in museums, there might be 5,000 or 6,000, let's just say 20,000 people come through the exhibition while it's up. Those are 20,000 people. There might be a few people from out of town come and visit it, but for the vast majority of people, when it comes to just my own artwork, the vast majority of people have only ever seen the digital versions of them. And so and now with NFTs, you see people who are literally making a painting and then taking a photograph of it, scanning it or whatever, putting it on the web, and then destroying this. They're like, okay, well, this has no use anymore. In fact, it's lowering the value of the original. Anyway, just it's something to think about, because that's also the way that I'm doing my comic book, my graphic novel. I'm doing it all on the iPad to start, doing all drawings, printing it out, making big painted versions of them, scanning it back, and then doing things. So there's a lot of steps. Maybe I think my editors think I'm doing too many steps because it's going too slowly. But my vision is ultimately, when it's done, it's going to look really great. Let's knock on wood here. Every available surface. Okay, so let's move on here. Look at Paula's versions here. Oh, wow. That is wild, Paula. I love that you've included this sort of like fox here. I mean, I'm assuming that, right? That's what's happening. We've got this animal snout and eye and ear. Maybe another ear there. Kind of resting its chin on this hand. Huh. Because this is God's hand and this is man's hand. Or Adam, I think, right? Wild. I mean, am I just seeing that, or I'm sure somebody else might see that, but that is so interesting. I love that you saw that image there and decided to paint it, right? That's a very surrealist kind of a gesture, is that you see an image in this case, like the cracks in the wall or the ceiling, and rather than being like, oh, I'm seeing an animal face in there, I better get rid of that, just being like, oh, I see an animal face in there, I'm gonna bring that animal face out. I think that's really cool. These hands are a little bit yellow. They're maybe a little jaundiced or something. Somebody needs a little bit more vitamin D, or a lot multivitamin. So I think what we could do is just have a little bit more red in here, a little bit more of a peachy color. I see a bit of it in here, but I think it could use a little bit more. Like if we look at Sandra's here, I see a really good use of these skin tones here, right? Because it looks a little bit like green and alien like. And then lastly, wow, Heidi, that is wild. Great. Look at that. Very different as well to everyone else's. But these are really nice colors that you've used for the hands. Right? I mean, it's slightly distorted. But you know, this reminds me a lot of Lucian Freud. Actually, I don't know, how did we get this far without doing a Lucian Freud painting? Lucian Freud. Maybe I'll just even show you right here, because Lucian Freud is really famous for having did this painting of, he's a British artist who did a painting of the Queen. That was not very popular. In fact, maybe this is what we should do. We should do this portrait of Queen Elizabeth. But like very kind of meaty, chunky, there's a physical quality to these paintings. And we see them, this little painting that he's working on, and she's sitting for it. People were not happy when that official portrait was revealed. But anyway, I just want to say that the way that you're using the paint here has a definite kind of Lucian Freud quality, which is I think in my view a great compliment, because Lucian Freud is sort of seen as like the painter's painter. Sandra says, I've thought about doing my 100 paintings as NFTs as well, but I keep going back and forth. I am for sure going to have a show and rent out my own space in LA, and everyone will be invited. Wow, that's cool. That would be amazing if you did that. Great idea, Sandra. Yeah, NFTs. I'm sure there's probably some people like, what is that? Is that like KFC NFT? Is that like a KFC's vegan salad bar chain they're starting? So probably just that needs a longer explanation. Okay, wow. Before I think we should stop here and look at your own artwork. You guys create so much work, and the community keeps on growing that it's hard to get through all these things. It takes longer than it ever did. I just want to while we're right here, just make a quick little reminder that if you're finding any of this interesting, you're learning anything, it's helpful, please consider leaving a donation as little as $1 through the PayPal, through the Super Chat function, or contacting me directly via email or through the Facebook group. As well as just a quick reminder to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, take a photograph of anything you're working on, send it to the Facebook group. And if you haven't participated in today's episode, have courage. Let's see your work. That's the first big step to get out from behind the anonymity of the computer screen. Let's see what you've been creating. Look at all the great stuff that we've seen so far. Okay, so let's now take a look at artwork that you guys have been creating over the past few months. Actually, a lot of the stuff is going to be over the past few weeks, because I try to go through these each time in their entirety. So here's Dolores's painting that she gave to her grandson on his 10th birthday of Superman. And look at that smile. Does that not just warm your heart? Oh my goodness. And I bet you, Dolores, your grandson must just think you are the coolest person ever. That is awesome. So this is just once again a reminder to get your work out into the world. Maybe it's not sharing it on Facebook. Maybe you don't want to have it as part of one of these feedback episodes. But give that artwork to a friend or family member. It will totally change the way that you see yourself as well as they see you, right? You, especially like little kids, you know, they start seeing grandma as like, wow, my grandma's this incredible artist. Every time people come over to my bedroom, they see my paintings of Batman and Superman. It's so cool. And then how that might influence their own choices that they make through life, of kind of having a different relationship to art. And boy, oh boy, as I say all the time, the more and more people that are painting, drawing, playing violin, learning to write and journaling, all these different dance, all that kind of stuff, I think it makes the world a much better place. And I don't think we would have wars like we have in Ukraine right now if, let's say, Vladimir Putin, instead of spending the whole COVID period thinking about whether Ukraine is a real country or not, if he was making some paintings of Superman, right, and giving them to his children. Anyway, I digress. Great job. I love this, Dolores. I think this is a great way for us to begin, because I would love to see more photos of you guys sharing your work with the world. Okay, so as promised, because we didn't get a chance last time, I want to go right to Isaac's work here. Isaac's been waiting patiently. So let's take a look here. I was just reading the chat there, people talking about these. Wow. Okay, so here, catch me if I'm wrong, Isaac, these are yours, right? So wow, these are cool. So these, Isaac was doing the drawing class and wants some feedback on his drawings. So I'm just going to look through them all first here. And we've looked at some of your drawings before, Isaac. I think not last episode, but maybe the one before that in May, or was it April? And you're definitely coming along for sure. It is really cool. It's always interesting. I think it's important to kind of think about what one's intentions are when they're making any artwork. And so is it to, and I mean, I can ask you, Isaac, like, is your intention to learn to draw so that you, or draw in a way so that you can do like photorealistic drawings? Is that your goal? Or is your goal to do something that maybe has a little bit more of a stylistic component to it? Like to be, like, because, you know, like, we've all these different artists, like Matisse, you know, is acknowledged as one of the great painters of all time, and yet no one would really look at his paintings and think they look realistic, right? Or even this Nicole Eisenman painting we looked at, right? I mean, there's nothing realistic about this image, nothing photorealistic. It doesn't look like a photograph. It's very expressive, right? It's got all this texture on it. You know, if you look at it from the side, those eyebrows, they really stick out, right? So, and yet, I mean, I would consider Nicole Eisenman to be one of the greatest contemporary artists, you know, working today. But no one would say that her work is particularly realistic. So I'd be kind of curious, because there's two ways that we could go with your work here, Isaac, is to try to make it more realistic, more photographic, or to make it more stylized. Isaac says, well, the thing is, I try to make it as realistic as possible, but sometimes it makes me take a long time because I care a lot about how they look. Interesting. And it does look like you've spent a long time working on these. Okay, so like I see a great deal of attention to detail in the way that you're drawing these, the face, you know, like these eyes. You're really looking carefully, which is great. You know, like getting this look. Like, I think there's... I'm trying to think, what would be the... What would I suggest to you? There's a few... Okay, I could think of a few different strategies that you could use here. So, I'm imagining these are from magazines, newspapers, or images you found on the internet, right? And maybe these are celebrities or just people from fashion magazines, musicians, etc. What I would suggest you could do is you could get something like carbon transfer paper, you know, the kind of thing that we use all the time for our outlines. And one of the things you could do is, if you've got one of these images, is that you can print it out, or if it's just in a magazine or newspaper, you know, you could photocopy it and then take some carbon transfer paper. You know, I got this from a dollar store down the street from our house. I think that's maybe not quite as common to find this at the dollar store, but I literally paid, I think, $1.25 for this. And carbon transfer paper, if not, you should be able to find it at like Office Depot or Staples or an office supply place like that, or certainly any art supply store. And if you can't find them at any of those places, there is a link for carbon paper in the description below. And so if you got that, and like, let's just say really quickly, let's just take a couple minutes here. Let's find an image kind of analogous to, I want something big enough that we'll see it. Sorry. Let's see. I get some magazines here. I just have all this stuff that I use for collage and gluing. I want to find a picture of a person. How do I get... Okay, so here, let's just take a picture like this real quick. So what we can do, like, probably what I would do is, if I have this, I would just go to, you know, a photocopy place. At most libraries, you can use their photocopiers. Pay 25 cents, make a photocopy of that. And then take your paper, and you could do this on a window. If you can tape it to the window so you get some of the light coming through. As it says, they're my favorite musical artists, right? So what I would do is do this. Then we can take our pencil and just really quickly trace around this. And you could do this for anyone can do this for, if you've got another painting in a book that you really like. Just photocopy it at the library, check out the book and take it home, and then do this tracing on your photocopy so that you don't ruin the library book, or you don't have too many lines over top of the original image. Because if you have a bunch of lines over top of the original image, it can make it kind of hard to see. But anyway, let me just kind of speed this process up, because I'm not going to do this whole thing, but like, this is basically what I do for every one of these episodes that we create. All right, I create these outlines in the same, very similar kind of fashion. Oh, okay, you know what? It looks like this thing shifted. That's why you want to use tape, because I tried to do those. Okay, so either way, we've got, this would help us, right? So now we've got a drawing of the original side by side, and then in order to help you get these proportions better, let's just try to ignore how weird that face looks. Then what I can do, now I've got a drawing of it, and I could literally take this, hide that, get rid of it, and then try to do a drawing from scratch from this. Because now this one's got the proportions quote unquote correct, and then this one I can, you know, I can see if I can kind of sketch it in roughly like this. All right. And we can even, you can even like take a ruler, just draw a line. Okay, there's the bottom of that shirt. There's there's her chin. Do they kind of match up? There's the top of the head, right? And that way I can start really getting the proportions right, because I feel like that might be something that is frustrating you, where arms or legs are maybe out of proportion, and you might not feel like it's that can definitely be a thing that drives a lot of people nuts, is the proportions being off, like when you're working on a drawing. Because like, for instance, it's probably like her head looks maybe a little bit bigger than the rest of her body, like her legs look a little bit shorter, right? Her hands look a little bit smaller. Now, and again, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. In fact, I could see someone taking this and even amplifying it, right? There's like in a strange way, this work reminds me of I'm not sure if you've heard of this artist, Ralph Steadman. Ralph Steadman is probably most famous for being the friend and illustrator of a lot of Hunter S. Thompson's books. Try to see if there's an image. Now, I imagine you might, I don't know how you might feel about this work. You might be like, oh my goodness, does he think this is what my style looks like? Because Ralph Steadman is one of the most famous illustrators of all time, a great artist who's beloved around the world. His style is, you know, if you can sort of get past the splatters and stuff, which you might look at and be like, oh, I don't like that at all. But just the way that he allows the figures to be a little bit distorted and strange is something that people love about his work. Another artist that we haven't looked at is Egon Schiele, who's famous for like these super distorted versions. Well, this is not the best example, but I love that. I mean, this would be a painting I would love to do at some point. Where, I mean, I guess this is not very distorted, but I love that image. Where's one? Maybe not the. So here's, I mean, I guess just the bodies are really, like, he really embraces the strangeness and awkwardness of the human body at times. And rather than trying to do something that looks photographic, he really embraces the kind of his own strangeness. I'm always telling my students, let the freak flag fly. Instead of trying to do it perfectly, do it the way that you do it, and allow yourself to pour out of the pencil or the paintbrush. Isaac says, these are very nice. I find drawing hard. It takes me a lot of time. It may not end up looking right. Yes. Okay, so, but what your idea of what right is, try to think about where that sense of taste comes from, because it might not actually be your own sense of what is right. Sometimes, like often, especially, you know, if we're just kind of getting into art, or a lot of my students at art school are just coming right in from high school, and their idea of what good art is what, you know, other people have told them good art is. You know, just because something's in a museum or art gallery or magazine or newspaper doesn't mean it's the greatest artwork of all time, right? That's what some editor says is a great artwork, or a curator says is a great artwork, but it might not be what I think a great artwork is, right? And I'm an artist who's exhibited in some of those museums, and sometimes as I'm taking down my artwork, another person's they're setting their stuff up, and I'm like, oh my goodness, okay, right? But you know, that's just my own sense of taste, and they're probably setting up their stuff and be like, oh, is this joker? Look at this garbage stuff. I can't believe you showed his and I'm showing the same place as this idiot, right? So taste can be quite different. But a lot of us, when we're kind of, you know, at first, are be like, well, good art is like Raphael and Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and Claude Monet and all of these famous names, right? And then we think, oh, but what I'm doing, well, it doesn't look like any of those people, so I guess it's not good. I guess it's just bad. I wish I could do stuff that looked good like all those people. But first of all, maybe we don't have to take it for granted that those things are good. I mean, think about food. You've probably gone to a restaurant and somebody's like, this is the best soup I've ever had. You want some? And you're like, okay, sure, I'll try it. You're like, oh, that's revolting. Why? How can you even eat that? Oh, so gross. Right? Same sort of thing with painting or drawing. What your concept of what a great artwork could be just might not be the stuff that I mean, you're probably capable of doing it if you spend enough time slogging through trying to get there. But is it really worth it? You know, it's like trying to pound a square block into a round hole. Anyway, Isaac says, also with the would you have any suggestions on avoiding using an eraser? Because sometimes it leads to a lot of smudging on my drawings that I have to clean up afterwards. And also with the shading, I find I can't get a great blend, especially on the clothing. Well, so there's a lot of things there. How to avoid using an eraser? Well, you know, often in my drawing classes, I generally prefer if students don't bring an eraser to class, because often, if you have, I find this all the time. If people are given an eraser, they will use the eraser, and they will use it all the time, right? People, if they have an eraser, like I'm telling you, I see this kind of stuff all the time. People will be like, "This, no, I get it," and they are stuck on this little area for, I kid you, I've seen people sitting here. No, it's not. They easily an hour just trying to get, and it's like, dude, move on. Like, the drawing does not hinge on whether this line is you know, it doesn't matter. That's such a small little part, right? It's like someone you know, I was making garlic potatoes earlier, and I was cutting, you know, it's like, my garlics are not all the right pieces. Who cares, right? Like, it's not like I'm going through with tweezers and making sure each piece of garlic is the same size. that is like an obsession with perfection that is holding someone back when this is happening. They're so preoccupied with making it perfect that they cannot accept the beauty of what they've already created, and all they see is problems rather than like their own style coming through. So like when you say, how do I stop using an eraser? First of all, I would say, well, just put your eraser in a drawer or throw it out the window and stop using it. Stop relying on your eraser. It's probably holding you back, because most of the great art from throughout history, artists will do lots of stuff and allow that to kind of stay there. Like let's say if we look at Rembrandt drawings. Rembrandt, one of the greatest artists in human history. Let's take a look at I'm just finding the first thing here. So this is a Rembrandt image. You know, it's what, 400 years old. And this is an etching. So an etching is something that once you scrape into the etching plate, you have to live with it. There's no eraser that will erase a line from an etching plate, because you're sort of carving into a metal plate, and then you ink it up and you print with it, right? So here we see all sorts of little scratches that Rembrandt has drawn, but they're very, very light, and he just lets them stay there, right? And maybe they're not in the right place to begin with, but that's okay, because he just keeps on drawing and just keeps darkening things down. So those initial lines that were not in the quote-unquote right place, they just get covered over, or they disappear underneath other subsequent lines. So that would be the first thing I would say, is get rid of the eraser. Secondly, don't worry about the lines that are in the wrong place. So there's two ways you can go about it. You can go like Rembrandt, just keep on drawing, or you can use a lighter pencil, so it's making less dark lines. Often I think one of the things people do, I see this all the time in classes, let's say people will do their outlines like this. And I'm like, whoa, 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 you're pressing way too hard, because now these lines you're going to see forever. They're leaking through, as opposed to drawing your first lines like this, right? Very lightly. And now I could even just move this head over here, and you know, I could have, let's say I have two eyes and a mouth here. I can just change this face to face a different direction, and I can just leave that there, and maybe I just cover it with some hair, right? And you might be, well, I can still see a bit of a face. Well, that's great. 200 years from now, some curators will go, look at that. If you look carefully, you could see how at one point Isaac had the eyes pointed in this direction, but ultimately he decided to leave them facing this way. What a discovery! We see the artist's brain in progress, working, figuring out the composition, right? That's something to get excited about rather than to feel ashamed about. The other thing is, you know, you're talking about leading to smudging that you have to clean up afterwards. Let's look at another artist. Oh, what's his name? What's his name? Oh, just William Kentridge here. So another artist, William Kentridge, is a South African artist who is famous for these really cool animations. You should check them out. Another artist that I want to do. But his drawings are just completely covered in smudges, right? He sort of draws and erases on the same thing and takes photographs and animates all these things. And by the end, they're just completely covered in smudges. And I know that you're like, oh, that sounds awful. But he allows for that to happen. He really, in fact, embraces the smudge. Right? Like, here's an example. Like, look how he's drawn this face. He's moved the position of the head, and yet we still see the original position of that head further back there, where it was moved. I think that's amazing. Anyway, if we just sort of, I want to wrap up here because we got a bunch of other artworks I want to look at, but I think they're coming along great. The other thing you can do that you may really want to strongly consider is using a pen over top of it and what we call like inking your drawing. And this is the way comic books are done, right? Comic books will start with pencil, and they're sketched out, and then another artist, often a totally different person, takes those sketches and then uses ink and draws over top of the drawing. So for instance, I'll just use a Sharpie just so it shows up. So let's say I've done this drawing. Another person might take this and then come in and draw, you know, the hair over top. Maybe change the expression. And so by the end, you've got this image. And remember there was a face facing the different direction there? I can't even see it. I didn't need an eraser to get rid of it. By the end, it's just going to be so covered that it doesn't matter. It doesn't, like, I don't need this eraser. Get rid of it, right? It's just holding you back. And I know it sounds frustrating because you're like, I want to get better. I need that eraser. Well, that eraser can be a real crutch, and it just makes you feel like you're never getting any better. Like, I think if we inked some of these drawings, I think you'd feel maybe more satisfied with them. Because maybe if you're feeling like the smudging is driving you crazy, then maybe pencil is not the material for you. Maybe you think, I want to be drawing, but pencil is just one tool available to artists, right? You can use ink, you can use a brush, you can use a computer tablet, you can use collage, like a scissors, you can use a stick in the sand. I mean, I could go on and on for all the different art supplies but pencil is just one of maybe 1,000 different tools that you can use just for drawing. We're not even talking about painting or anything else. So, and maybe you want a pencil that doesn't smudge. Instead of like a 2B or 4B pencil, you want like a 3H pencil, which will not smudge at all, right? Okay. Yeah, I gotta move on. But they're turning out really great. They just need a little bit more work, like proportionally. Like this head is just a little bit too big. These hips, I think, could be bigger. Hands are really hard to do, so it just takes time to study to kind of get better at it. But you're really on the right track, and so don't give up. Just keep on working. So for instance, let's move on here and let's talk about like Alex's stuff. So Alex is another artist who's maybe in a similar position, really trying to kind of, he's also doing drawings and wanting to get better at his drawings. And Alex, in this case, is actually using a grid, right? So we've talked about this. I talk about it in the drawing course for sure. I'm not sure which episode it is. I think it's about halfway through. But you can use a grid, just like Alex has done. You draw this grid on your paper, and you also draw it over top of the image that you're trying to reproduce. And as long as there's the same amount of boxes, they don't have to be the same size, especially because you can use the grid to enlarge things. That's how Michelangelo got those giant drawings on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. But this is going to help give some precision to your artwork. So I think you should just watch that video I did on how to use a grid to make drawings. It's in the playlist for the drawing series. I think that would be really helpful, because that's a whole other technique that you can use to get much closer to everything being in proportion, because that way you'll be able to see, like, oh, my body's too long or too short, the hands need to be wherever, right? So here's another, this is, I think, close, this is Alex there, and this is after, it's hard to see, I think he's erased his grid after, because you can still see a little bit of it up here. And artists have used grids for 1,000 years, and there's still lots of artists that continue to use them. Here's another drawing by Alex. That is cool. So a lot of smudging happening here too, just like you, Isaac. So we've got smudging and straight lines. But I think what you can take inspiration from Alex is he just keeps going straight ahead. And it looks like you as well, Isaac, have just keep on. You're excited enough about making art. You keep on going. You just need to keep on going. Don't give up, right? It'll get better and better and better as you go. And then you'll look back 5-6 years from now and be like, wow, like I have come so far. I can't believe it. And I can't believe I was having those questions back in the day. Like, look where I am now. These are great. Looks like a lot of the same images here from Alex. Ooh, cool. Again, there's a grid here. We can see he's gridded it up. All right, so everything is in pretty close proportion. So it allows him to get a good accuracy when he's drawing these figures. Wow, look at that. Another one here with all the grid. Yeah, that would be my number one advice, Isaac, is probably throw the eraser out and draw a grid. And those are just 2 of probably 50 different options I can probably list off. But I think I would love to see, if you used a grid, upload some of those pictures, and let's take a look at them next episode. That would be your homework assignment. Very cool. Great job, Alex. Look at how you're just improving, every day, sticking with it. Let's look at Donna's here. Wow. Okay, so we looked at, I think, something similar. Was it last week, or did Donna do more work on it? Oh, I gave this to my son for his birthday. I don't have a finished picture of it. So this is based on a Tom Thompson, this canoe. Looks great. I would love to see the finished version of it. Go over to your son's house. Take a picture, Donna. Here's your version of the blue dog. We are going to feature this artist in August, I think. Is it Hernandez? I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I have it on the list of things to do. This artist who's very famous for painting blue dogs, but I think this is one of your own dogs, Donna, that you've transformed into a blue dog. That's cool. I love the purple nose. That's a really nice, because we have these contrasting colors, our warm red and our warm blue. So having a bit of purple in there, a color that is created by mixing those colors, I think is a smart idea. The other thing too is, we have a red that's warm. We also have a warmish blue. Maybe it's a little bit of, maybe that's a cool and warm blue mixed together. But for the most part, they're similar color temperatures, so they're both. We don't really have a problem with them competing for the foreground. We have maybe a little bit of cooler grass up here, but since these colors are so intense and dominant, and the grass is relatively minor down here, not such an issue, but really cool. I like this. I also, just the expression and the look in the eyes, those reflections work really, really well. Great dog. Yeah, Donna says, that's my dog. So Holly posted this. I don't think Holly did this painting, but posted this. I guess this was done in another online course somewhere, and wanted a little bit of advice how it was done, and said that the originally did some painting. The text, it's hard to see. exactly how this is done. But it does, yeah, it looks like there was some texture that was applied first. So a few different ways that one could go about this. You know, if we were doing it in one of our classes, what we would do is do the image transfer to get started. If you wanted to do an imprimatur, you could do that at that stage. And then you let it dry, and then you would take some clear gel medium and like a heavy matte gel, which I used, well, let's say I used for this painting, right, to get these eyebrows. So you just, but if you just paint it without any color in it, just paint it right out of the jar, like so, like this heavy matte gel. If you just take that and you could just paint it, spread it all over the surface, and then kind of, you know, you can create a design or pattern on it with your paintbrush. You could use a comb or anything that could kind of create that kind of ribbon-like quality. And then you let that dry. And then once that's dry, then you can just paint the image over top of it. Now, I will say it's going to be a bit of a challenge, because now you've got all of these peaks and valleys that you've got to deal with. So it could be a bit frustrating for sure, you know, to get like lines that appear to be sharp. It would take time, because you're no longer painting onto a nice flat surface. You're having to kind of navigate over top of those things. You know, it's sort of like a drawing a boundary between two countries, as that, you know, when there's a mountainous landscape, you know, in between them, right? It's going to be pretty hard to kind of go up and over in a nice straight way. Like sometimes those lines are going to zigzag around. Isaac says, thanks so much for your feedback. I really appreciate it. You brought up lots of things I never thought of before. That makes me so happy, Alex. You're definitely on the way, and I know it's probably frustrating because you're not where you want to be. But just think about most people, 99% of everyone on Earth wants to be able to do what you're doing right now. They look at what you've done and think like, wow, I could never do that. You know, you're just so amazing at drawing. It just, I'm not good at drawing. And so they're looking at what you've done and are just in amazement. But you're looking at what, you know, some of these greatest artists in human history have done and are kind of bummed about not being able to do that. Well, you are, like, if you think of it like a marathon, you're halfway done the marathon, and most other people are like, oh, marathon, and I can't even walk down the street to pick up my mail from the mailbox, right? Like, I can't. So you're way, way, way further than most people ever imagine they'll ever be. So let's keep on going here. Holly, I guess these are some images. Holly's got a commission to do these, and is gridding them out. I couldn't quite understand. I guess you're going to do this and you're going to remove their hats and jackets and make it in the summer or something. Sounds like a big challenge. So good luck with that. I don't know what advice yeah, I mean, what I would probably do is I would probably do like what you've done here. You call it this Franken reference, like Frankenstein, where you've glued them all together. I would do that kind of thing, and then I would draw it out, and then I would make a painting, maybe a smaller version of it, so that I can work out the composition, what goes in the background, and my colors. And then when I'm kind of satisfied that it looks good on a smaller scale, like even like 9x12 size, or then I would maybe make it bigger. I think a lot of artists make that mistake of like, okay, I got this really important thing. I need every minute I have to make this big painting, and they go right to that big painting, and they get stuck pretty quickly because they don't really know what they want to do yet. You want to have a bit more of a plan, so get that a smaller like sketch. And if you think like, oh, just so much, like most of the great artists throughout human history did small sketches, which is why, you know, if you go, you might see some museum might have a small version of a very famous painting. You're like, oh, why did he make that one? Why did she paint this little one? Well, that was the study that was used to create the big one. And probably the most famous examples I can think of would be Tom Thompson, the Canadian artist who did all these little tiny sketches in Algonquin Park, sometimes in his canoe, then went back to Toronto and made much bigger paintings based on them. Holly says, I wanted to share this idea I saw. She used icing bags of paint for her hair. I have to say, I wouldn't have thought of it. That's cool. So, sorry, I don't. This is, I guess, another artist's work, Heidi. That's cool. We've done. Actually, I did something very similar to do these eyebrows. I keep using this painting, but that's how I just put this paint inside of a Ziploc bag and cut the corner out and squeezed it out, just like, you know, an icing bag for decorating a cake, right? Then Holly says, I've painted this cat and I need some tips for whiskers. And so there's some great advice. I didn't actually read the comments, but I did see that Deborah had posted this image and Holly had posted this image of cats that they had also drawn as sort of suggestions on how to draw whiskers, which is one of the reasons I love our Facebook group, is that someone can post an image like that and say, hey, help me figure out how to finish this painting. And then you've got, you know, right now we've got 330, 35 or whatever people who are part of that group who can all weigh in on someone's question like that, which is awesome. And we have very different suggestions. Some people who have maybe a more abstract tendency are going to come up with one solution, and some people who are more into more photorealistic things will have a different solution. So I think there's lots of different ways to approach this. You know, again, like, so if we look at the way Deborah did, right, everything is, we have this very kind of what would you call it, like, I mean, it's almost abstract, right? The way that these lines just sort of flow outward. But we believe it, we understand what it is, that there's a cat with a butterfly on its nose. So this is like very stylized, right? I love that, right? On the other hand, Holly's going maybe for something, or sorry, Heidi's going for something that's maybe a little bit more realistic. There's a bit more of like almost like a Gauguin quality to her style in this painting. But you know, these whiskers are done, I'm not sure, use slow dry medium. So you probably want to make the whiskers not too solid or opaque. So I think that's what Heidi's suggesting, is to make the paint a little bit more transparent so that the whiskers, you can see them, but they're not just like big, like if you paint them opaque, and especially if they get a little bit wider, they're going to look like pipe cleaners rather than whiskers. So you could do just a few kind of thinly painted ones. And the other great thing about using glazing fluid is that because it has slow drying properties, if you paint it and you don't like it, you can wipe it away if you're within about a minute or two after applying it. So you can paint it and then decide, oh, I was in the wrong place, or it's too long, or too white, or too gray, or too purple. You can just wipe it away. You just get a rag with a little bit of water on it, clean rag, and you can just wipe it right off. Again, you want to make sure you're not scrubbing into the surface or other paint's going to come off. But if you're quick about it, you can get it, you just remove it entirely. And then that way you can kind of see immediately how you feel about it. Let's continue. trying to think. We've got some pictures here from Sandra's studio. Look at that. Look at all of these colors and swatches. I wonder what you're up to here, Sandra. What are you working on? Testing your colors. These look like some kind of value scales. Mixing the colors to find the ones that you like the best. That's really cool. I also love that you've labeled your jars here. Really, really, really smart. Because you want to make that easy for you so you're not having to think about it all the time. Oh, that's my warm yellow. Okay, boom. Or you might have 5 different warm yellows, but at least you know that that's a warm yellow, and then this is a cool yellow. And just as a quick reminder, I think Gamblin is the oil paint that I use for painting. They're based in Portland, Oregon. I've gone and visited the company. I've gone into the factory and watched them making paint. I'm good friends with some of the people that work there now. And Robert Gamblin was the former head of restoration at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. And after he retired from that, he started his own paint company about 15 years ago. And it's the highest, I'm not paid by them to advertise it, but I think it's great paint. But anyway, and most paint companies will have a list similar to this on their website. Any paint company that's worth its weight is going to list this kind of thing. And so we have here just listed by alphabetically, but let's say you want to list them by color family, or right, we can go here. So we've got all our yellows together, and you can just look, okay, cadmium yellow medium, that's warm. So this, for instance, this is the color that we often use for our imprimatur, right? Cadmium yellow medium, right? Cadmium yellow deep, that's just going to be even more warm. And versus cadmium yellow light is going to be on the cooler spectrum, right? And any lemon is also going to be cool. And then if you really want to get this, another reason I really like Gamblin is that they get into the nitty gritty here, where it's too hard to explain at the moment, but they literally have it listed by like we can find exactly where it is on the color wheel using this information here. This is all, again, it's kind of a little bit more complicated than we need, but I think it's worth taking a look at the colors. Even if you have different colors that we're not using in class, it would be worth your time to look up that color and try to find and just label it, right? Like, I mean, all of my paint, even paints that I'm not using, all is labeled warm or cool so that I don't have to think about it. I mean, like, let's just keep on moving, but it just makes things so much easier, because maybe I do want to choose, let's say, a different color that I'm using differently just for whatever reason. I can just look at it and go, okay, I need a cool blue. I would, however, strongly caution you from just Googling, is cadmium yellow medium warm or cool? Because then you find these blogs and things that people have created who know nothing about what they're talking about. We're like, oh yes, actually ultramarine blue is a cool blue, which it absolutely is not, and there's 0 artists on planet Earth who would agree with that, but there are people out there who just come up with their own weird, non-scientific reality, and they put it out there, and it confuses people. And I've spent decades of my life trying to fight that misinformation. But go to the paint company, Google the paint company's name, and find that information. And it was, sorry, the long digression here, Sandra, for what you're talking about. Nova Color. I haven't... Nova Color is a paint brand based down in I don't know if they're still in Santa Monica. I used to buy my paint from Nova Color when I was living in Los Angeles too. That is so wild. Yeah, they're like a local, I mean, in Los Angeles paint company. That just, I've such, it's like a flashback to being there. Because we don't, Nova Color, it's not, they're not like a big enough brand that they're in art supply stores all over the world, but Sandra's working on scales for an upcoming mural. It'll be my first time using split primary for a 900 square feet mural. That's cool. So, okay, interesting that... So, you know, if you're painting gigantic images, trying, you know, mixing your own green, for instance, or your own orange, or browns, or purples, all of these secondary or tertiary colors is, you can do it, but, you know, that might be pretty difficult, because you're creating like big batches of paint, and that's an instance where buying your own greens and things could be helpful. I mean, 900 square feet is a big space. So what I would suggest is you can, I mean, it maybe looks like that's what you're doing right here. You can mix them all using this very limited palette, but that would be an instance where you could conceivably, let's say you were going to do it was predominantly green. I would probably, rather than try to mix my own cool green or whatever, is to buy a green that is very specific, that you could even try to see if you can match that color from your split primary, and go based on that. I think it's just, you just want to keep in mind, like, that's so this is interesting, thinking about all of this. I would just avoid having 20 different greens, or, you know, 20, like right from the jar, like buying, like, because that's what I used to do when I first made a bunch of money through the sale of my art. I went and bought literally every tube of Gamblin paint. I've probably put Robert Gamblin's grandchildren through college with all the paint that I bought. But what I would do would be just to buy one green, or maybe two greens, and then to use your warm yellow or cool yellow and cool blue and cool, you know, to modify those greens ever so slightly. So you might have a lemon green, a very saturated green, you might have a more grassy green, and then you can kind of add those together. But rather than buying 20 different greens, you're just keeping maybe a more muted one and a bit more saturated one, and then tinkering with those. Tinder says, I want to do it as a challenge to myself, and I may be kicking myself in the butt after. I can't wait to see the progress. That sounds like that is going to be a really interesting result for sure. The reason I started this class was to better paint murals, so I'm so excited it's happening. That is cool. I mean, I really applaud you for trying to scale up these concepts to something that big. It'll be really fascinating to see how that turns out. Very cool. And here you've got your canvases for the class. You're gessoing them, getting them all set up and ready to go. Awesome job, Sandra. Okay. Let's continue here. Robin said in the last feedback episode, I said that we're going to be doing a Peter Doig soon. In anticipation, I did this painting. So I think for Canada Day on July 1st, I think we're doing a Peter Doig painting. Peter Doig was born in Scotland, raised in Canada, now lives in Trinidad. So a lot of different countries. I think there's another country in there somewhere. A lot of different places claim Peter Doig as their own, but he uses a lot of Canadian imagery and motifs in his work, or at least he did for some of the paintings that have made him really, really well known, and especially the probably the two paintings that have sold for, I think, about 80,000. I don't know. He sold a couple for at least 40 million. So there's yeah, he's doing pretty well for himself. Anyway, so this looks great, and you've really got a little bit of Doig's style here. When we get to Peter Doig, we may even be using a totally different color imprimatura, because he really likes to play with like the color and trying to create, like, so if he was to paint like a pink rather than just taking white and red and mixing them together and painting a pink, he might add, there might be several different layers that he's doing, that there might not actually be any red or white at all, but through the layering of the paint, by the end we get that what looks like a pink, but he's using layering to create these kind of very strange effects that that is what's made him so kind of renowned. Anyway, great job, Robin. That's awesome. Robin says here, from Michael's back catalog, Frida Kahlo's Fruit with a Parrot. We did this painting probably 2 years ago. Looks great. Yeah, this is really well done. The only thing I would say is maybe underneath, like these shadows, I think should be a little bit darker, because it really looks like there's maybe yeah, it just needs to be, like, you see, I think you've hinted at it here with this little bit of a darker value. Be just a little bit more of that right where they're touching the ground, where these fruits are touching the ground. That's gonna be your darkest shadow. Otherwise, everything looks really great. Really, that one turned out really nice. Here's a photo that Richard posted of them at the National Gallery of Canada, outside the National Gallery of Canada, and this is this giant Louise Bourgeois sculpture of a spider. And Louise Bourgeois, who she can't still be alive, is she? I mean, if she is alive, she's in her early hundreds, or maybe late 90s. And if she has passed away, she would have been either 100 or very close to it. Kind of one of the great elder stateswomen of art, and that the spider is probably her most famous motif. Let's look here at Paula's photo. Painted a picture of a Ukrainian soldier in the war zone. That is pretty cool. I love that, you know, the soldier's carrying this little cat. I think it's interesting, you know, the way that you've painted the background in this kind of very jagged, abstract kind of thing. Could be forests, it could be ruined buildings, it could be a lot of different things, which I think is kind of precisely the what's happening, is things are getting pretty jumbled out there. So it works pretty well. It does, the figure, it is almost a little bit obscured as to what's going on here, and that maybe this is a guy who's going snowboarding, and he's got a snowboarding helmet on. So it's not quite, I mean, I know what it is based on the title that you've kind of given here, but I also don't mind that level of ambiguity. Ambiguity. So that's cool. I like that. Here's a painting of Toronto's harbor here. It's time to do boating in Toronto. The hot and humid is coming to Toronto. Yeah. I would try to think if we could... It looks like, you know, all the color is in the background. I would like to see more color in the foreground. These birds are kind of just, they look like they're all kind of yellow and sad. I think we want to have a little bit more life in them. And the water, I think we could have a little bit more, even some warm blue in that water, potentially. And I would maybe even contemplate making these buildings here just kind of a little bit less distinct, and could be just like a silhouette. Now, I probably wouldn't paint black. I would paint like a gray, so they just sort of are kind of disappearing into the background. We could even paint like a glaze over top to kind of give a bit of, like with a cool blue and a little bit of white, just to make them fade out a little bit, because they're outlined with a pretty dark purple, and it's a warmer purple, so it's kind of pulling them forward. Small little details, but wow, that's cool. These two people fishing here, like mother and daughter, father and son kind of thing, well silhouetted against this background. So that black works really well in this instance because it sits right next to the horizon, or to the picture plane here. Good use of color. I think even this could have been a little bit lighter, because you see how, because it's also black just like this, it's kind of sitting in the same distance from us, so it kind of makes it look like, oh, is this potentially like is this a cave that they're sitting in, and this is the top of the cave, right? You know, like, whereas if we had done this with a little bit of gray in these trees, it's going to make those trees look still silhouetted, but there's like a bit of atmosphere a little bit further away. That's nice. I like these birds too. That's really cool. I think you could put even a little bit more of that warmer blue up front here. Really beautiful sky though. That is gorgeous. Really nice. I would probably even take a little bit of this white and just kind of zigzag it down here. We also have, you know, our cool yellow down here and our warm yellow up here. So I would just flip those. I would have your cool yellow around the sun and your warm yellow in the reflection. And similarly, we could use our cool red in and around here, and our cool red down here. So keep an eye on those color temperatures. These guys, these little animals, that's cool. I'm just gonna keep plowing ahead here. I think I've talked a lot about colors today, but I really appreciate Pascal posting these here of the Skittles versions of the color wheel. It is, I think, kind of what we were talking, more saturated colors towards the outer edges, and inside we get much more muted colors. And that's great. The more, I think what's really exciting is when we start to understand these concepts, you start to see them elsewhere, and you can start to like identify colors with greater accuracy, easier and faster. And I would even say, like, my own ability to do that has improved radically over just the past couple of years, because I didn't really ever try to match colors that often prior to doing this whole series, just because I would just mix the colors I wanted. But, you know, when I'm trying to mix the colors that I see in a famous painting, I really have to think about, like, how on earth would I make that? And that's pretty tricky, right? So, but the more and more I do it, the more, yeah, I make a ton of mistakes. But if I can understand why I've made the mistake, and then maybe even try a few different mixtures, different color combinations till I get closer to the one, I'm like, okay. And then that's a big learning experience I can put in my back pocket. Maria says, too subtle? I don't think so. I like these. I mean, someone could even say maybe they're not subtle enough. I mean, obviously, when we're painting these white lines over top of this darker background, they really pop. Here, they still pop, but they're just way more... they just take that extra little second to reveal themselves. And I'm always up for a painting that requires time from us. I think that's cool. I think these turned out great. I would actually say I probably prefer the one on the left, personally. I like... the surface just feels maybe a little bit more unified. The one on the right... I don't know. I'm sure if these were up on the wall in an art gallery, there'd be someone would prefer the one on the right and someone would prefer the one on the left. And you could have two different sales to two different people, right? So great work there. Okay, let's continue moving along. Maria says, 1 year later, I painted this Alyssa Carson astronaut painting. I really liked how this one turned out. After I finished it, it sat into our right above our dinner table for the past, what, year and a half. So we just recently put in, I think, a new, I can't remember which painting we rotated into that place, but this one I think was a particularly satisfying episode for me personally, and a lot of the paintings that people have done based on it have turned out really, really well. We've got great colors on her face. This highlight is awesome. You did a great job with the helmet and giving it that bit of cool blue that was reflected onto her. The background is also great. What can I say? It does slightly appear that maybe her neck is a bit too wide, but I'm just nitpicking. I think it, or maybe a little bit long. I mean, it's super. I wouldn't. Yeah, just never mind. I think it's fine. It looks great, but there's a lot of tiny little details in there. That's really cool, Maria. Great job. Let's do this next here. So Maria chose to, rather than the Kazimir Malevich painting, did this landscape, but then used some of the crackle paste to try to get these cracks. And I think Maria was saying not happy with the results, but I think it turned out great, especially the crackling. Right, so it looks like there's very little up there, but as we get closer to the bottom, the cracks get bigger and bigger. I mean, I don't know if you're still watching, Maria, but I don't know what there is to not like about that. I think it turned out great. And if anything, it's really, really nice that the cracks get really big at the bottom. And I think you did that deliberately. And you said, I tried using cool colors and white in the background to create depth, but it doesn't. I'm not really sure what the issue is. I think it looks fine. I think you've got a lot of depth in there. And I really think that the crackles down here. So we have, like, ordinarily when people do a painting like this, what happens is I end up thinking, like, well, there's nothing in the bottom of, like, why do we need all of this extra space down here? Like, there's nothing there to pull our eye down. So I would say, like, well, I think the painting would be fine like that, and we could do it in a horizontal format, landscape format. But the crackle paste is giving us something to look at on the bottom of the painting that creates this kind of cyclical movement that we can look up down here and then circle back and kind of get trapped into kind of this downward spiral deeper and deeper into the painting. I think it's great. I don't know. I'm kind of a little bit baffled to what you're not happy, why you would not be happy with that. So, okay. So, oh, I think I've already talked about the ones I wanted to end on. So let's just, I think this is our last images to look at for tonight. This here is a painting by, or sorry, this is a photograph that I think Ravi took. Come on. And so this is the original. And so that's the photograph, and then this is the painting that Ravi made based on that image, which I think is, you know, turning out pretty good. I don't know if this is the finished version of it. It looks like Ravi actually painted it on location, because we can see the masts from behind sticking up in behind. I do see a few things here that I think we could improve on, and part of it I think is a little bit of to do with perspective when it comes to drawing. And that's one thing I always think is, most of the time people's paintings, you know, when people have problems with the paintings, I would say 80% of the time it has nothing to do with paint at all. It's all about the drawing, which is why I encourage everyone after this just to go and watch the drawing course and start learning how to draw a little bit better, because I think that'll make you feel a lot better about your actual paintings. But anyway, I just thought what I would do is I'm just going to quickly do a version here of this for you, Ravi, and so you can see how I might do this sketch. And not that I don't like what you've done. I just want to show you maybe how I would break down this composition. So the first thing I would maybe even think about is, do I like where everything is? Do I like where the horizon is? The horizon line is right in the middle, which is fine. I usually try to encourage maybe a little bit more of a dynamic composition by moving the horizon up or down. But let's just say, for our sake, we'll keep that horizon. Maybe because basically you want to think about, like, what about this scene am I most attracted to? Is it the sky, or is it the water, or is it the boat? What is it about this scene do I really want to show people, right? What do I want the viewer to focus on? Like, what is it that is most special to me that I want to share with the world? And that would be, you take 100 different artists and you have them in the same location. 100 different people are going to come up with 100 different compositions, because they're going to fall in love with different parts of the scene. However, I would say, so it looks to me like what you find most interesting is not the sky, but it's like the rocks and all that. So I'm actually going to do, I will raise this horizon line. I'd probably have my horizon line up here, and then these trees, and then that far dock here. And then I have, you know, maybe a little bit of this shoreline coming out a little bit further. I've got this house. And then we've got this boat here. And right here, this boat is kind of right up against this edge. I'd probably be inclined to flip it so that the front of the boat was pointing inward into the composition rather than the front pointing out of the composition. So, you know, I would probably do something like turn it around and have the front of the boat pointing in that way, and then these masts coming up going right off. Right, so I would probably do it like that, and then we can have the name on the back if you want, or you could put any name on there, right? And then there's probably water obscuring that bottom part, and then we have our diagonal line here for the sidewalk, and I'm making it kind of expand, so we have this going here, and then so this is, it gets wider as we go here. Right, and then we have all these rocks and things down here. We have our dock. So these lines are all receding towards a point that's off on the left. This little, I don't know what this thing is here. Maybe I would even take that out if I'm not happy with where that is. So that would probably be how I would compose this image. And maybe there's just a few clouds in here. Does that make sense? So maybe if I just quickly go And then we have all these rocks, so we can have a lot of fun drawing. So that would be probably the way that I would compose that image. And if we just sort of now look at our choices side by side, like what it looks like you've done, Ravi, is you've kind of straightened this sidewalk. So it kind of looks to me like what you've done, straightened this out. You've got your, so you got your boat here. So I think a few things, that, like the most obvious thing that kind of drives me crazy is this line here. That line needs to be, at the very least, it needs to be like that. And then all of these should be straight. These lines that you have going in this, like this, I think at the very least should be going in this direction or straight down. They should either be, yeah, I think let's, I'm just working on the logic within your artwork. This boat, I would probably have the, you know, the front of the boat like this, and that mast. Does this make sense? I think even just those little changes would be helpful. So if we get rid of this. Right? Okay. So, that brings us to the end of today's episode. If you found anything interesting, useful, revelatory, or humorous, consider liking, subscribing, hitting that notification bell, and then if you want to leave a donation to help encourage more of these feedback episodes, please strongly consider leaving it as little as $1 via the PayPal link, the super chat, or contacting me about those things below. So, having said that, we'll see you guys on Tuesday when we paint the Stanley Cup, the hockey trophy. If you've got any young sports fans in your family, they may quite enjoy seeing a Stanley Cup, right? Or if you don't want to do the Stanley Cup, you could do the Lombardi Trophy for the Super Bowl, or the Isabel Cup for women's hockey, or any other kind of trophy if you want. Maybe it's for a ballet trophy. Hey, so we'll see you guys on Tuesday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. We'll see you all soon. Take care, everybody. Have a great night. Thanks for sharing your art, and those of you who are so courageous to do so. We'll talk to you all again very soon.